Oh, hi there. If you like cricket in a way that brings you to, the good areas channel, then I think we have the game for you. Hit Wicket is a mobile game that is way more than just about, smashing your screen. It's about strategy and what you really try and do inside a cricket game. However, there's still a little bit of fun and gaming involved because you can get superpowers when you get things right. And it's not just about playing either. You can build your own team and coach it and manage it and do all those other things that, let's be honest, you really want to do all the time when it comes to cricket. So download the game now. Bring out the cricket pundit in you and download Hit Wicket free for mobile. Because Hit Wicket is a cricket game made for you. Stick it in your pocket today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 23 of the Overthrows podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find literally everywhere. We've got some people in the comments already. Rupesh Gupta, Yash Singh, Arko, Parv, Kundan, Abhijit, Varun Tiwari, they're all complaining about us being late. Well, you guys should be used to that by now. But anyway, Jared, we'll start off with the T20 World Cup. And India have clinched their second T20 World Cup title and have become the first team to win the competition unbeaten as well, after what was a thriller of a final. And now, as a result of winning that final, they've broken their 11-year ICC title drought. They've broken the hoodoo. And just how huge is that?
Means we don't have to talk about it anymore, so I could not be more excited. To be honest, there was no losers as far as I was concerned in this, because if South Africa won, we didn't have to talk about their one anymore, and if India won, we didn't have to talk about their one. So from that point of view, I'm kind of happy to move the narrative on and move things forward. No, look, it was huge. That was a team, and South Africa would have been worthy winners of this World Cup.
Yeah.
But India was a team who should have won a World Cup for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. Put themselves into a position multiple times to be successful. Really good in bilateral cricket, and it was a joke that they hadn't won so far. And these tournaments are random, and things do happen and everything else, but that's not how fans see things. As when we just saw that England in the football went 40 seconds from being out of their tournament, right? And that's how random it is in these big tournaments when you come up. If England go really well in this tournament, no one's going to remember the 40 seconds is going to be like, but that was part of our origin story. That's how we got there in the end. And if they lose, people are going to be like, look, they almost lost early on. Like, they weren't that good to begin with. We look for narratives sort of backwards. But the point being is that this was a good team for a very long time, and they deserved to win. And also, they were made to do it the tough way in the final, right? They got behind in that game 2 or 3 times and, eventually just got over the line.
Yeah, they were tested quite a bit. And of course, to all of the Indian followers who are in the comment section in particular and who are watching this video, congratulations. Go celebrate that team. Go flood the streets of Kolkata, Mumbai, Bengaluru, New Delhi, Hyderabad, Chennai, and all the other cities that I've missed.
All the cities that don't have IPL teams as well.
Yes, Pune. All the cities who had IPL teams and don't have them anymore. But anyway, there was one person in this Indian team who deserved to be called world champion more than any other cricketer, in my opinion. He was the person who, in my opinion, also won India this final. Jasprit Bumrah is an emperor. If Kohli is the king, then Bumrah has to be the emperor. I would have given him the player of the final as well, but he rightfully bagged player of the tournament. Just since the last time we've recorded Overthrows, he took 2 for 12 versus England, 2 for 18 versus South Africa in the final. And in his last 2 overs, he gave away 6 runs and took a wicket. In total, he took 15 wickets in this competition at 8.26 apiece. So less than 9 runs, per wicket. And he also struck at less than 12 deliveries a wicket. His economy was 4.17. We've done an entire foot marks on him. Jasprit Bumrah, Jared, is goated. And it would have been a disservice to the sport if he never won an ICC trophy, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could go through the list of the players that it would have been a bit ridiculous if they hadn't won a major tournament here. I think that's fair. But yeah, it's one of the best World Cups we've ever seen a player play. He was absolutely magnificent all the way through. Just brilliant cricket. And there's a few things that happen. Obviously, like India eventually take the spinners off, and the Rishabh Pant knee bandage and all those sorts of things that sort of happen in that period. But all of that is available to India or helps India because Jasprit Bumrah had to bowl 12 more balls, right?
Yeah,
and that's the key. And, I thought South Africa were well ahead of the game. And I thought he might come on the over before where Akshar Patel. So I had a bet on South Africa. And so after the Kuldeep over, I got off because I was like, well, they're going to have to bring Bumrah back now. And instead they went the opposite. And they went Akshar Patel, and it all went to hell, right?
Yeah.
And he dragged that back. Like it's such a huge moment, really. And the second over is the one he's going to be remembered more for. Sorry, the fourth over, I suppose, depending on how you look at it. But that first over, where literally he could have bowled Heinrich Klaasen in one delivery and almost got him LBW on another. And Heinrich Klaasen was batting on a different plane of existence to everyone else at that point. Just magnificent bowling by Jasprit Bumrah.
Yeah, and if you want to hear both Jared and myself talk more about him, you can go and watch our latest Footmarks podcast, the Jasprit Juggernaut. But just a quick fact on him as well, in the last 32 overs that he's bowled for India in T20 internationals, he has gone for more than 10 runs twice. So that kind of tells you a story on its own. And Jared, only Bumrah could have won any team that game from that particular position, right? Those deliveries that he bowled, in particular to Reza Hendricks, an outswinger from hell, and Phil Salt, the one in the semi-final, the slow one, which kind of angled in. I suppose if you talk about ball of the tournament, it's those two and the one that Naveen bowled ahead. Which one are you leaning towards? I think I'm leaning towards that outswinger that got Reza Hendricks.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that delivery is, and I hope cricket fans are starting to get this, because every time I talk up a delivery like that, people go, oh, but it's because he was playing the wrong line. He was playing down the leg side. And it's like, yeah, because that's where the ball was going. And then it stopped going there. That's why he was playing that line. Yeah, it's really stupid of him to not understand that the ball was going to move 12 centimeters away from him. So I understand that. I think the best ball was Naveen Al-Haq to Travis Head, the one that he played and missed that 3 balls before, the one that he went out. Also enjoyed some of the grubbers of the tournament. Look, I think maybe the most important one is the Marco Jansen one. So it's maybe not as good as some of the other balls, but the ability to, again, ramp up perfectly and hit the top of the bails when you need to be able to do that and put it in an area where Marco Jansen's going to feel uncomfortable about. I just think it's a completely different level of cricketer. Yeah.
Of course, Bumrah wasn't the only star with the ball for India in that thriller of a final. And just before I get to the other performers, Carlos Brathwaite, remember the name, Misbah Scoop, this finish. How would you rank them? Because those are clearly the 3 biggest moments in the T20 World Cup finals that we've ever seen.
I think Carlos is still number 1, isn't he?
I would go for Carlos number 1.
And history-wise, the Misbah shot is more important because it really does change the trajectory of cricket. But maybe, yeah, I mean, this is probably quite similar to that one. So probably depending on how you look at it. And if you add the extra element of the rope not being quite where it should have been, and, a lot of people thinking they saw the Toblerone move when Sky's foot hit it. And also just when he hits that, David Miller, no one knows if that ball's gone for 6 or if it's been caught, right? So it probably has a little bit more on it than the Misbah one. So yeah, maybe it's slightly above, but I don't think there's much between it. And because of the history element, maybe the Misbah one goes back ahead, but just, it depends on where you want to put these things.
Fair enough. Let's talk about that Sky catch now that you've brought it up. Of course, an absolute game changer. In fact, game finishing catch, right? Tournament winning catch. He's never going to catch a better ball in his life, particularly if you take the context into consideration and the pressure that was on. And Hardik Pandya, as well as he had bowled an absolute pie, right? A full toss. And Miller even latched onto it. And then Sky goes on and takes one of those parried catches. Fantastic footwork. Some people thought that he did hit the Toblerone thing with his foot. And there were close-ups. Some people said it was just the grass going up. Some people said that the boundary rope was already pushed back. But then Sky
and all these things are very possible.
He didn't push it back, right? He didn't push it back, though.
All those things are possible. Like, I honestly think he probably hit it, right? Just because of how close he was to it. That doesn't mean it moved. And it doesn't mean that there was any evidence to overcome it, right? But my first instinct was he just flicked that. And then we saw the first few replays. Probably we needed some more. Obviously, we needed a higher angle to see where the boundary rope was. There was a few issues there. Again, we should have specialist third umpires, but you know, all these sorts of things happen. But there was nothing in the replay that suggests, like, if this was more contentious, I think I always look at it when sometimes I'll even put up a tweet just to see what the reactions are to something like this. I would have said maybe 15% of people at most thought that, taking away Indian fans out of that vote, but I would have said at most 15% of people would have thought that there was something on it. But it doesn't really matter. It's why I called it the foot of God, because at a certain point, that doesn't matter. Like even the Maradona thing, I got a really angry LinkedIn message from an Indian fan today going, Maradona cheated. Maradona didn't cheat. Maradona went for a header. The ball hit his hand in his foot. The ball then went trickle forward and he went and scored a goal. Right? It's not his job to tell the referee what has happened, right? Yeah. And we know that with batters. Batters do the exact same thing, right? They nick it and they stand there. That's not cheating, right? It's not your job to officiate and to play the game. And there's no way that Sky would have even known, even if he had, or if he hadn't flicked it, right? Because it was such marginal contact on either way. But that's the fine margin of this game. And it's not even the only fine margin, because the Heinrich Klaasen edge is another really fine margin, right? Of, you know, he doesn't smash the cover off that. There's a couple of millimeters in this game between India winning and India losing. And that's one of the reasons why it's going to go down as one of the great games.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, Sky's composure taking that catch, regardless of what your feelings are about the legitimacy of it. I
exactly.
mean, if I was the third umpire, I was giving that not out as well. I didn't, you know, from the footage that we saw during the game, think that he had touched the rope. And the rope being back is something that happens all the time. Sky didn't push it back, right? It wasn't him. I feel like that catch was iconic. No one's ever forgetting it. There was also that delay with Rishabh Pant and everything, and teams often do that to break momentum. I think these are all like smart moves. I wouldn't say that India cheated or anything, not in the slightest. But apart from,
and I don't think anyone has said India's cheated, have they?
No.
It's just one of those things, right? Like we don't have the full amount of evidence, and yes, if you want to have a go at the umpires, and we can go back to the umpires making Australia and Sri Lanka go back out on the ground in 2007, and the overthrows incident, and many other decisions in World Cups that have been really, really important over the years. It adds to the drama, right?
Yeah.
In this particular case, and it added to the drama. Maybe it killed the drama. Who knows? Miller hits a six there, and it might have come down to the last ball. You know, so you know, and India might still have won even with that six, but it just shows you how close that game was. You know, completely on a knife edge, and you know, it makes it such a great game, which means a bit like the 1999. No, what do I mean? 2019. World Cup, right? Yeah. I think it's a similar kind of situation where the game is worth it. And so we will be talking about the game for the longest time. And Sky being, well, let's say even if he touches it, doesn't matter because it doesn't move, right? So him being a millimeter to the right side is all that matters at that point.
Yeah. And I mean, that was a fantastic catch. I mean, we've seen some great catches throughout the tournament, but just given the context, I'd say that's catch of the tournament. Anyway, coming to India's bowling, Kuldeep went for 45 runs, wicketless in his 4 overs. That is one thing I could never have predicted. But Arshdeep was someone who more than made up for it, right? 2 for 20 in his 4 overs, and that penultimate over in which he gave away just 4 runs. This was a guy who was taking regular wickets throughout the tournament. In fact, he ended as the leading wicket taker at 17, which is the most, or tied most wickets in a single edition, tied with Fazal Farooqi, of course, from this very edition. And I mean, he was taking wickets throughout, but he was going for runs. In the final, he went for 20, took 2 big wickets, Markram and Quinton de Kock. He really rose to the occasion, didn't he?
Yeah. Look, we've just had a question come in. Have I put it up? I want to talk about this a little bit. So it's an early super chat just because it fits into what we're talking about here. So ABCD says, is the ability to execute your skills under immense pressure taken into consideration enough when we analyze a player? For example, Arshdeep yesterday in comparison to Janssen, when talent-wise, Janssen is better than Arshdeep. The difference is that it's really hard for Marco Janssen because he has about 7 extra talents that Arshdeep doesn't have, right? Arshdeep has a very simple game plan that he needs to bowl. And when he's very good at it, it works very well. And when he's not. But when you talk about these kinds of things, you have to remember that in the semi-final, when after 3 overs, England were 26 without loss. Chasing 171, and they were 26 without loss because 17, 18 runs had come off Arshdeep
Yeah.
at that point, right? Like, he had given England a great head start in that game. And so that's why these sorts of comments don't make as much sense. But the difference is, when you look at someone like Arshdeep, he's a singular unit. His job at the start is literally to see if it swings. He can bowl a little bit of back of a length at times, and he's fine at that. He's not great at it, but he's got a secondary skill. And then at the death, he's got the wide Yorkers, and he's got a decent enough cutter. Marco Jansen can bowl Yorkers that are unplayable. He can bowl proper swinging balls back into the stumps. He can bowl slanting balls across on back of a length. He can bowl short ball. He's a praying mantis who's massive and comes in from different points of view. The point being, though, if Marco Jansen had the better game than Arshdeep yesterday, does that make Marco Jansen a better player? No. What was great about Arshdeep was, I think there were times in this tournament where he was a little bit out of control. And he wasn't handling the pressure particularly well at times in this tournament. And he wasn't always bowling well. He had some terrible bowling spells in New York, for instance, right?
Yeah.
But I think the really interesting thing is India's like, no, we need a left-hander. We think he suits us as the second seamer more than Mohammad Siraj does. We think he's a natural wicket taker. That's the things that I really like, because Arshdeep is the natural wicket taker. That's, I think I did the video when they lost in the last World Cup. I was like, Arshdeep is a wicket taker. Like, that's why he's an automatic selection for me. His ability to take wickets all the time. That's what he did. And he was really, really important at this game. And Marco Jansen has a bad game, but there are plenty of other times when the opposite has happened. Marco Jansen had a very up and down tournament because he's a very up and down player.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at those last 5 overs, right? Bumrah bowls the 5th last one and the 3rd last one. And of course, up until Jasprit Bumrah is still bowling, you're never truly out of the game. But I feel like Arshdeep played his role to perfection over there. And there was another wicket taker in the mix. Hardik Pandya ended with 3 for 20 in his 3 overs. He got that massive scalp of Heinrich Klaasen. He had an amazing tournament, Jared, with both bat and ball. And after the year that he had, came back from injury, had a shit IPL, got cussed during the IPL, left, right, and center.
By his own fans.
By his own fans. Then comes and has this sort of a World Cup in which he is absolutely clutch with both bat and ball. And then, finishes it off in dramatic fashion, getting the biggest wicket or South African wicket that there was out there, literally. I mean, what a comeback. And it really is a testament to his mental strength. This guy is a strong lad.
Yeah, look, a lot of people were telling me consistently that I was wrong. And I think I wrote or made a video at one stage where I said that Hardik was an automatic selection. And I think what I actually meant was when fully fit. And he's like the first name on the team sheet. And people got really upset about it. I got emails about it and everything. And I was like, hey, you haven't quite listened to what I said. But regardless of that, there's no other team in this World Cup that wouldn't take Hardik Pandya.
Yeah. I mean, he is one of the first names on the team sheet, right? The balance that he provides.
Exactly.
And he's a partnership breaker. If you want 6s towards the end, which he delivered with so frequently, he's your man.
And I understand the whole form thing, right? And him and Shivam Dube and Virat Kohli all had that form thing at different times, sort of in this campaign or before this campaign or all those sorts of things. But you don't get to the level that those players are at without being elite players. Right? Even Shivam Dube, right? We know that he can be elite. We know he has more holes in his game than everyone else. And someone will say to me, oh, but Hardik Pandya, he struggles when you bang it in back of a length. I'm like, yeah, he's an all-rounder. No one's expecting him to average 45 with a strike rate of 165, right? We're expecting him to have a couple of holes in his game and occasionally struggle against leg spin when he goes in early and all those sorts of things, because he also bowls for you. But the most important thing is that level of player you can't replace with just like a regular guy. And
absolutely not. It's Dre Russ and Hardik and maybe Stoinis, but not really. Like Dre Russ and Hardik are operating at a different level. No one's there.
You can use when Pandya is fully fit, and that is the key thing for Hardik, right? He has to be fully fit. But when he's fully fit, he's a fine fifth bowler. Probably even a better fifth bowler than Andre Russell is at his absolute best, I think. Andre Russell's like the world's greatest 5.5 bowler, right? Where you just like, you don't really want him to have to bowl 4 overs. But if he's got a good pitch or, his knees are working that day, you get him to do it. Hardik can probably be a fifth bowler without too many issues there. And then you don't lose much, like compared to the world's number sixes. But there were obvious question marks. Like he turned himself into an anchor. He clearly wasn't in great batting form. I don't know what he did with his entry points for Mumbai. And he wasn't bowling particularly well. It was a hard tournament to bowl, but he wasn't bowling well. A lot of that has come together. And the opposite could have happened, right? And I don't think that would have made him a better or worse player than he is right now. But you and I both know in a lot of people's minds that has.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he brought out the 80s pawn stash, right? And how could you possibly go wrong with that?
So many men have.
Yeah. I've also sported a mustache back in the day, but that was my Fawad Alam mustache. It was different. I'll share a picture someday, maybe. Let's come towards the player of the match in this final. I didn't agree with that decision. For me, it was Jasprit Bumrah, but Virat Kohli scored 76 of 59 in an innings which had 3 phases. Comes out and smashes 15 runs in that first over by Marco Janssen. 3 fours, vintage Kohli, risk-free batting. One is a slice towards the offside, one is a straight drive, inch perfect, and then a beautiful leg glance. Then, of course, India lose all those wickets and he kind of goes into his shell. But, gets his 50 or 48 deliveries and then does accelerate. His last 26 runs came off 10 deliveries, ended with 76 or 59. It was a catch-up innings. And, of course, we judge those catch-up knocks with a grain of salt. But it was really an innings that would, either be criticized if India lost, or it would have been applauded, which we will now applaud it now that India have won, because he played the situation well by holding up one end and ensuring that not more wickets fell. But Jared, had South Africa gotten over the line, we would have probably started this show off by talking about the Kohli knock and how it could potentially have been the difference between both sides. It comes with the territory when you're that caliber of a player, but all in all, fantastic knock, and what a way to sign off.
Yeah, I mean, I called it Schrodinger's Kohli, right? Which is kind of that'll be my new Goldblith effect, which is when a player plays an innings in the first innings and you don't know whether they have played an innings that's going to win their team the match or potentially lose their team the match. And the next step along that, in this case, is even now I'm not 100% sure where to rate that innings because of how the game went. It's funny, you said what a lot of people on Twitter said to me when I sent that tweet out. They were like, oh, he had to rebuild. So he was 32 off 26 at the end of the 8th over, I want to say, or was it the end of the 9th over? I can't remember. And he was then 50 off 48.
Yeah.
Right? The rebuild was finished by the 8th or 9th over. They bat to number 8. They had a pinch hitter in. And I do think a big part of it was he said to Akshar, I'm going to stay in. You try and whack them. And Akshar just couldn't get them away at the rate that they wanted them to. It's one thing I will respect about the way they played. They didn't do what they did in 2019 or what they did in 2022, right? They didn't go all the way back into their box and stop. They kept putting pressure on. They didn't probably put enough pressure on. And ultimately, let's be honest, it took a sensational last couple of overs for them to win that game. So we know they didn't quite put enough pressure on, but they did try to. But it's a baffling innings, right? If he's ended up on 50 or 48, that makes you feel like that India was struggling all the way through his innings, and they weren't, right? Yeah. They struggled a lot in that, what would you call it, that second phase, as you said before. It's probably 4 phases, isn't it? It's him attacking, them losing all the wickets, him rebuilding, and then him accelerating right at the end. And he had a chance to do that earlier. He decided not to do it. But because of that, in a final, he also did the other thing you do in a final. You put runs on the board and you hope that you build enough pressure. That's why it's Schrodinger's Kohli, right? And if Klaasen faces 4 more balls, as you said before, or Miller sky steps on the rope, or any one of those multitude of small moments that they won towards the end of the game doesn't happen for them, what is the analysis? And I don't think it's fair in either direction. But I do think that because Akshar couldn't quite score at the rate that they needed him to in that situation, that Kohli could have put a little bit more pressure on. But you have a look at that period, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, up until when Akshar went out. They have quite a few overs where they score okay. This isn't a situation where it's not like the 2023 World Cup, where they just stop scoring altogether. And that's the important thing for me. On both sides of the ball, they kept looking for wickets and they kept looking for boundaries. It wasn't a complete defensive thing. And that's apparently all they needed was that and a little bit of luck at the end to get over the line.
And India have evolved, right? They have changed the way they play, but that old style of play did kind of come to the fore in the form of Kohli's knock, at least up until he accelerated. I'm going to use that, Schrodinger's Kohli. I like that. But if you talk about the other knocks in that innings, right? Akshay Patel's promotion, kudos to Rohit Sharma for that. He's been given that role a few times this World Cup, has pretty much come off every single time. He scored a very valuable 47 of 31. And Shivam Dube, who so many Indian followers literally were fighting with me that this guy doesn't deserve a spot in the team. I kept telling them that, look, you guys can't say that Rinku should have been ahead of Dube because Rinku is a lower order hitter. Dube is your spin
It's two different roles.
Yeah. Dube smashes 26 of 17, the perfect little cameo. He doesn't even get to face spin. So he does a job that is beyond his role. I feel
Well,
like
he did. He
those
faced
two-
Shamsi.
He
He
did
faced
actually,
Shamsi, and it was a really interesting over because I was like, well, this is easy. He's either going to go out here or he's going to hit a six. And the first ball rags past his edge. Beautiful ball by Shamsi.
Yeah, I
and I was
remember
like,
that one.
okay, well, next ball's definitely a wicket or a six. And the next ball, he gets an edge and gets off strike, which is the worst thing because it brings Kohli back on strike. And you're like, no, that's why Shivam Dube's out there. And then he whacks one ball. But that was it. That was the end of South Africa bowling spin. Again, though, you know, the threat of Dube meant that I think they only bowled that Shamsi over because they had to. And that's why Dube is so important, because he really did freak them out. And in the end, South Africa got away with it. But Maharaj didn't bowl out, and Shamsi didn't bowl out, and Janssen did. And Janssen was bowling a bucket full of arse, right? So they would have loved to have not used Janssen in that situation.
Yeah, he was, off his radar pretty much all tournament. The few good deliveries he bowled in this T20 World Cup got him wickets. Gave away 49 runs, even though he took Kohli's wicket, but that was a little too late anyway. It was an absolute howler of a game. And Aiden Markram has captained splendidly throughout the tournament. I think he got quite a few things wrong in this final, particularly not bowling out one of those spinners.
I think both of them did. I think both captains made mistakes. And
Rohit's big blunder to give Akshay Patel that over, right?
Yeah, well, I
Can't forget
think...
that.
Also, he probably waited too long. It was quite clear that the ball was coming on great for spinners, and he just kept bowling the spinners over and over again early on. And I was like, you've got to mix this up. You've got to bring Arshdeep or Hardik on here, at least have a quick from one end. So I thought both captains made a few mistakes. But in a World Cup final, we're going to notice that a little bit more. And I've got no issue with that. No one ever captains a perfect game. It's just that when you win sometimes, that's how we remember things.
Yeah. And I mean, when he gave Akshay that over, I was like, really? Versus the best spin basher in contemporary cricket? That sounds really stupid to me. But I mean, it didn't end up costing India. And I feel like if you combine Akshay and Dube's knocks, they have more impact in that innings than Kohli's knock. Maybe that's a hot take. Maybe people will disagree. But yeah, I mean, that's my reading of that particular innings. Anyway, let's come to South Africa. When they needed 30 of 30 and then 26 of 24. In no world did I ever think that they would lose this final, and they lost that by 7 runs. And I hated, Jared, when the C word is used, incorrectly, because it's thrown, away so frequently, and everyone loves that narrative, and it's a very convenient narrative. We always get to hear it, even when it isn't a joke. But unfortunately, dare I say, that kind of classifies as a joke.
The problem I have with that, and I don't think you're wrong, like as in they had the game. So it classifies as a choke in a... So many times we hear, South Africa choke again, and you're like, wait a minute, didn't they just get thrashed in that game? It has nothing to do with the choke. Like I remember I was reading somewhere recently that South Africa choked in the 96 World Cup against West Indies. It's like, no, they picked a spinner when they should have picked Alan Donald, and Brian Lara played a great innings. That's not choking. 99 World Cup is hilarious, of course, because both teams choked all the way through that, and one team choked last, and that's what matters. I've done so much analysis on South Africa and World Cups. And generally what happens in knockout games is, I think, the most important thing is the ability to trust your batting down to a certain number. I don't think that necessarily means that you need to have a great number 9 or 10, right? Which South Africa have had at times. But it means that you have to have 6 top-notch batters. So no issue there. Reza Hendricks is the only one I would say is not an elite batter, but he's still more than fine in a World Cup final. And unfortunately for him, by the time that final got around, he wasn't in any form. These things happen. But even he's not, there's nothing wrong with his batting. But once you get to number 7 and you have Marco Jansen, there is always going to be an issue once you lose 4 wickets. And in bilateral games, I don't think it affects them because it's not the same kind of pressure. They can just swing out. And I remember looking at their ODI team at one stage, and Miller and Rassi had put on, they had this partnership of like an average of like 80 over 2 or 3 years for the 4th wicket. Sorry, for the 5th wicket. So they would just, it didn't matter when those two came in together, they would stretch the innings all the way through. And then a couple of, Ndili Peslaqueo or Dwayne Pretorius or Marco Janssen, whoever it was coming in at number 7, would whack a few at the end.
Ryan McLaren, he was there, remember?
Yeah, I think Ryan McLaren was even before that. But yeah, he was another one, right? If those guys come in the last 3 or 4 overs in a normal bilateral game, it's fine. We've seen Marco Janssen do great in those situations.
Yeah.
Facing Jasprit Bumrah or Pat Cummins or Rashid Khan, right? All the teams that were there in that, Jofra Archer, Adil Rashid, right? There's so many. Kuldeep Yadav, whoever it may be, in the knockout part of a World Cup is very different, right?
Yeah.
And let's say that Marco Janssen's okay. Well, Maharaj is number 8. And then Maharaj is a proper handy tail ender. That's all he is.
I'm
Rabada.
just going to stop you there. I have one question to ask. Why did Aiden Markram promote Maharaj ahead of Rabada? I felt like Rabada could have been a better batter over there.
In that particular situation, it's interesting. I just think they had Miller there and they thought that Maharaj was more likely to get Miller on strike. And it's only later when Maharaj couldn't get bat on ball that it actually would have been more handy to have a striker there, right? To be honest, mate, it's not why they lost. Do you know what I mean? Like, Rabada could have come out and missed just as many as Maharaj did. Because the truth is, they're both fine, but look at some of the other teams. So Maharaj comes out at number 8. Who was scheduled to come out at number 8? For India. Did he even get out there? Was it Jadeja was scheduled to bat at number 8?
Yeah.
Think of the difference between Jadeja at number 8 and Maharaj at number 8. Go to Australia, right? Australia has, Cummins at number 8, when Cummins was playing in games, and Stark at number 9. Again, huge difference there. England, we've seen a similar thing with England, with their ability to have, number 7s, number 8s, and number 9s when they've been really successful. This issue comes up in knockout games when it is really, really important. And you either need a superhero performance from your top 6, and let's be honest, Klaasen did that, right?
Yeah.
It was almost enough. Or you need 2 or 3 guys to come together. And them losing a couple of early wickets set them back a little bit, but there was still some decent knocks in there. It's just hard, man. So is it a choke or is it an obvious fallacy that I've been writing about for 4 years? Right?
I mean, if you run a ball for 5 overs, even if 2 of them are bowled by Jasprit Bumrah.
If they're bowled by Bumrah, honestly, I put my money back on India. I took my money off after the Akshar Patel, actually before that. So I didn't have a bet for an over. And then I had a look at the situation and I was like, I think India is a reasonable chance of winning this game from here. So I didn't look at it the way that everyone else did. And I wasn't thinking about it from, this is South Africa. I was thinking about there's 12 balls of which they're going to have to block 8. Right? Basically. Suddenly, and how many teams in this tournament struggled with chasing 24 off 20, 18 off 14? We saw it again and again in this tournament.
That's true. It was the lowest scoring T20 World Cup of all time. Yeah.
And once you then have Marco Janssen facing Jasprit Bumrah, I get so angry about all this. People just call everyone an all-rounder, right? Mitchell Johnson makes a couple of innings. He's an all-rounder now, right? Stuart Broad plays a couple of good innings. He's an all-rounder. Morne Morkel, look at that back foot cover drive. He's a potential all-rounder, right? Don't get me started on Tim Southey. Yeah. Those guys all can hold a bat and they can do some really handy things for you. When you're facing Jasprit Bumrah, Marco Janssen is not an all-rounder. Doesn't mean that he won't get better because he's really young and he could develop into one later on. But right at the moment, he's a fucking giant praying mantis with a bat in his hand, right? And that was the situation once Klaasen went out specifically where things were going to change. So the Klaasen wicket is just, it's a combination of Bumrah's over, Rishabh Pant's injury, and dumb luck. As I said before, he could have missed it. He could have slashed it past the wicketkeeper for 4, right? But once that happens, their floor is now exposed. There is a reason why South Africa don't bat as hard as India and England and Australia. And it's because they're terrified of what happens if they lose 5 wickets. Well, they lost 5 wickets late enough into the game that they still had control of the game. But unfortunately for them, they also still had to face 6 more balls of Jasprit Bumrah, which meant that 5 wickets was 6 wickets. And now you've got tail-enders facing the bowling, trying to get them over the line at the end. And it's tough. And having said all of that, if Sky does stand on that rope, right, we're thinking about this completely differently, right? And that's the truth.
Yeah, of course.
So, yeah, they gave up a good position. I do think it was through a flaw of their own play. You can't say that the pressure didn't get to them, though. But you also can't say that India didn't play a massive part in this. You know, Jasprit Bumrah, before they even take Klaasen's wicket, Jasprit Bumrah has already changed the mass.
Yeah,
that's
true.
Is so huge. That's not someone choking at that stage. That is literally going up against the world's best bowler, and you're not sure what to do. So it's not as if it's not as if it's not quite as similar as going up against the Netherlands, right, in a must-win game and falling apart at the end, right? So it's a different kind of choke. It's a choke induced by going up against a ridiculously talented player and a couple of things just slightly going against them. But that's not going to matter because no one cares about that. All anyone is going to care about is the fact that they got it to run a ball and then they lost the game by what, 8 runs, 7 runs, whatever it was in the end.
7 runs. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Heinrich Klaasen's innings, of course, and we can't not talk about it. And he did score the fastest ever 50 we've seen in a T20.
He was actually the player of the match, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, he maybe should have been, right? It was a record-breaking 50. He ended up scoring 52 of 27. And that over, Akshar Patel over, which I think that, Rohit got wrong, particularly with 1 more over of Pandya remaining. He smashed 2 4s and 2 6s, and South Africa needed run a ball after that. And he also took down Kuldeep. I thought Kuldeep versus Klaasen was the battle of the game, and he won that battle. And he caught really well. He was fantastic in the field, right? He had a near-perfect game. And if there was any one South African player who did not deserve to be on the losing side, it was probably him. You've got to feel for him.
He was in tears, wasn't he, at the end? And
yeah.
Everyone
was. David Miller was in tears as well.
Yeah. No, but I mean, he knew where he had the team. Someone sent me a message saying he made a mistake. I think it was on last night's show, and I was like, what was the mistake? He got a wide ball in a T20 game, and he tried to whack it away. What was he supposed to do?
Yeah.
If he hits a 4 off that ball, it's over. That game was over because it really, India needed 1 more over of it being, 6 or 7 runs at most. And if he whacks that away, it's completely over. And it was a poor ball in an area where he could have a go at. Look, it was a magnificent innings. And, someone sent me a message not that long ago sort of saying, we're too friendly on cricketers. Like, these cricketers have never won a major title. In basketball, it haunts them forever if they don't win a major title. And I'm like, you look at that and you're like, how could we sit there and say that Heinrich Klaasen is not a great player when we just watched that innings?
Absolutely.
He didn't finish it off, right? And these things matter. But realistically, he took them from a position where, I think they were about 3 or 4 to 1, and he made them basically unbackable favourites. He just didn't get them over the line, and that's what is going to be remembered. But it was a brilliant knock, let's be honest.
It's really unfortunate that he's ended up on the losing side because that's a knock that literally, had he won this game for South Africa, it would have been the knock of the tournament. Now it'll probably, in my opinion at least, go to Rohit perhaps, that knock versus Australia. I don't know. That's a different debate altogether. It was a good toss to win for Rohit Sharma. That wicket definitely it called for a team to bat first, but that's not why India won this game. Of course, they started off, in a blistering fashion. 8 deliveries, they had 23 on the board, and then Maharaj got both Rohit and Rishabh Pant in the same over, his first over, and Rabada removed Sky early on as well. India were 45 for 3 in the power play and 75 for 3 at the 10 over mark. They should have never been allowed to get to 176, right? Marco Jansen had a howler. Kagiso Rabada took Sky's wicket, but then bowled pretty poorly afterwards. Markram's captaincy wasn't particularly great, right? He made some errors, as did Rohit, as we mentioned. And then I feel like Anrik Nokia, who was the pick of South Africa's bowlers, he got 2 for 26 in the final. He was the only seamer who got his lengths right. He was hitting that hard length, and everyone else failed.
I would say this, I just think that's his natural length. So that's probably, a few times in this tournament, we've seen Anrik Nokia bowl brilliantly. And you look back and you think to yourself, well, that's a pitch that suits him, right? So I think there's a part of that. Look, they got lucky, South Africa, because I don't think they bowled particularly well in this game. And I think that's one reason why you're right that they were, 75 for 3, he said, at the halfway point. Is that what it was?
They should never have gotten to 176, man. 170 tops or 165 tops.
But go back. The first 2 wickets were sweep shots. One was off the middle of the bat. The other one was a bit of a fluke dismissal.
Yeah, it was.
The other one wasn't. Rabada bowled really well at the start, but that wasn't really a particularly good ball, and it just happened to be that it found the fielder. They then, inexplicably, when they had India completely on the ropes, went with the Aiden Markram 6th over gambit, which at the time I didn't think was the worst strategy. Maybe when coming back for the 8th over, I didn't understand as much. But looking back on it, and I probably said this at the time, it just felt like he lost confidence in Shamsi and Janssen. And really, that 6th over, when they're 3 wickets down and they have to rebuild at that point, surely that's when you give Marco Janssen an extra over at that point. And then straight out of the blocks, you bowl Maharaj and Shamsi up front to try and put more pressure on. And it looked like all game, Aiden Markram was terrified that he couldn't that it basically had 2 bowlers he thought could bowl 4 overs, and he wasn't sure if anyone else could bowl 4 overs. And if you compare that to Rohit made mistakes in different ways, but one captain really backed his bowlers, and the other one just never looked like he fully committed to his bowlers all that much. And I think that was one reason this whole trying to get extra overs out of Markram. It's just like, well, if Akshar Patel's come out, okay, if Akshar Patel's come out to slog, let him slog Marco Janssen from back of a length. If he can do that, then fair play to him. But it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world for him to be able to do fresh out of a power play. So I just felt there was a couple of times where like they just didn't really back themselves. But outside of Nokia, like even Maharaj's figures look really good. But his first 2 balls went for boundaries, and then his third ball, or probably was his third ball, was it 4th or 5th ball, was caught off the middle of the bat. Like, I didn't think he bowled particularly well. Not that it was a good pitch for spinners. I thought Shamsi did okay, but then he didn't even, have the trust in Shamsi to bowl him enough overs. They just kept getting themselves in little knots all the way through. And if you're following on Discord or Twitter, I kept saying this. I was like, the math ain't mathing. Was the way that I was watching it, and that's what ended up happening when they need. And then they went, "Oh, we'll just give the ball back to Marco," and it's like, why? So I had that last over that he bowled. I don't know how many runs he went for. Was it 16 or 17? Does that sound
16 or 17, yeah. And then Rabada also went for 16 right after that. So
no, so I think Rabada went before him. Yeah, so Rabada went before him. And I was talking to Jake from Cricket 8, and I was literally saying to him, what's the over or under on this over? He had Marco at 13.5. I had him at minimum 14.5, right? And that's terrible. If that's what we're expecting. And I think he beat both of our marks, right? In a 8.5 runs and over game, which it was up until that over, you really shouldn't be marking down one of your frontline bowlers for that many runs. But so he lost faith in his spinners, fine, but then he bowled 2 overs of himself as a part-timer. Like it was just a bit scrambled a little bit. He didn't go for the kill, and they didn't defend well enough. And you got to do one or the other, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, he had a phenomenal record captaining in World Cups for South Africa. He is still the only South African captain to have lifted a World Cup, the Under-19 one. 6 wins out of 6 in the Under-19 World Cup. When Bavuma got injured during the ODI World Cup, he won 2 games out of 2. And in this T20 World Cup, he was 8 out of 8 until he lost that final. So commiserations to, what's his name, Aiden Markram, and all of the South African fans as well. Congratulations to India. But South African fans, this is a tough one to stomach. But heads high, chins up, your team gave us a fantastic tournament. It's just that the batting even in that, final... I mean, Riza, I'm not going to blame him. He got a Jaffa, right? Aiden Markram, that ball was there to hit, and he nicked it, right? Tristan Stubbs looked like $1 million when he was out there batting on 31 and then, 31 of 21 and then kind of yorked himself, took one step too, far out. And Quinton de Kock...
Didn't even york himself. He just kind of went too far away from the ball, didn't he?
Yeah, that's basically it. It was too long of a step, I guess, out
Yeah.
there. And Quinton de Kock was supposed to be playing the Kohli innings for South Africa. And he had just scored a 4 off Ash the previous delivery. And then when the fine leg fielder went out, he found him there. So, I mean, there were moments that South Africa could have capitalized on. But ultimately, the better team won. And India, the fashion in which they won, you've got to hand it to them, man. They were deserving champions. And boy, did they wait long for this trophy. They definitely deserved it.
Yeah, I think the favourite changed about 7 or 8 times. And if it wasn't India playing, the favourite might have changed 12 or 13 times throughout that game. India with their more rounded side. And if you think about it, me and Rob Barron talked about over on Cricket 8 how the most likely way for South Africa to win was going to be take wickets with the new ball and then also have Heinrich Klaasen go off. South Africa had 2 of the things that they needed to happen to put themselves in that situation, and they still didn't win, right? And whereas India, none of the Indian spinners bowled all that well. India lost even more wickets at the top of the innings than South Africa did. So that just shows you how rounded they are and how much more developed they were at that stage. And also, when it comes down to it, Rohit might have over-trusted his bowlers, but he completely trusted his bowlers. And it does show you that there was a difference in overall talent between those 2 sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we're done with talking about the final. There are some more games to discuss, of course, and we'll be taking a short break. You're watching Overthrows with Jared and Behram. Jared, if you could just take a look at the comment section. My nationality has sparked some hate. Take care of that. And we'll be back after this short ad.
Wait a minute. Your nationality has taken a hit when you've just said nothing but nice things about Indians.
Yeah, I said that it wasn't cheating. Everyone who's calling it cheating is bullshit, but now I'm the asshole, clearly.
People, that's what I mean. People are just absolute idiots.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber.
All right, welcome back to Overthrows. You guys are with Jared and Behram. And of course, we've talked about the World Cup, T20 World Cup final. Of course, there were 3 more games this week that happened in the T20 World Cup, which deserves some airtime as well. India absolutely smashed England by 68 runs in a one-sided semi-final in Guyana. And the bowling was fantastic. Kuldeep Yadav, who didn't do well in the final, he did take 3 for 19 in the semi, though, and was one of the best bowlers for India in this tournament. Jasprit Bumrah, 2 for 12. But the guy who really stood out was Akshar Patel. 3 for 23 to his name. He removed Butler, first ball of his spell, and then took a wicket with each of his first deliveries for his first 3 overs. Right? He stood up multiple times for India throughout this campaign, but that semi-final was a game that he well and truly owned, Jared.
Yeah, it's funny because there was so much talk about whether the sort of Akshar Jadeja thing worked, and one thing I really liked about that sort of thing was that when you have 2 players of that talent, it just elongates your team, and so that meant they had a number 7 and they had a number 8 from the Akshar Patel point of view. And it probably meant that instead of getting 8 overs out of them, which you would have if one was an off spinner and one was a left arm finger spinner, that you probably get 5 or 6 overs out of them. So you're not maximizing it because you have both of them, but it's still great. Look, they were just a lot better than England. And I can't remember where I said this now, but you look at England's record and you look at, it talks about Butler and Matthew Mott and all these sorts of things. It's, we need to get rid of everyone. It's like, so England won the 2019 World Cup and they won the 2022 World Cup, and they failed in everything else. And there's been some injuries and all sorts of things, and the whole Joffre thing is certainly plays a big part of it. But you know, when it comes down to it, you know, you're in a situation where, what's the best way of putting this? They don't bowl spin particularly well, and they don't play spin particularly well. And that was a wicket where you had to do at least one or the other, right? And the same things keep happening. I think, looking back on it, I was pretty buoyant on England until I saw the wickets. Until I saw the wickets, and I saw, oh, I don't know if they have a good enough bowling lineup here. But yeah, looking back on it, I do think that was one thing that we missed. And I talked about it in the preview that I didn't think that they were particularly good at playing spin, but I hadn't quite factored it in enough. And the wickets were probably not really set up for a team who wants to score at 2.2 runs a ball, right? Like it wasn't ideal for them. It wasn't a good game from them. They probably didn't have a good World Cup, right? They beat one test playing nation, I think, in the World Cup. Am I right in saying that? Just the
West Indies. Just the West Indies. That is correct.
Yeah.
They lost to South Africa. They lost to Australia. They lost to India as well. And they defeated the associate nations in the group stages. So if you look at England's entire campaign, sure, they looked white hot at times, particularly, you know, after the England versus USA game and the West Indies win. But more or less, they had a bang average tournament.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to see what happens next, because I've been worrying for a while with them about what the next generation doesn't seem quite as good as that last generation. And now they're in a situation where they're going to be confronted by that and how they go ahead with it. They just don't seem as rounded as some of the other teams. And, you know, you look at South Africa was a perfect example. One reason I really like South Africa coming into this tournament, and it played out more than I ever thought it would. I think I had them as probably third or fourth favourites, but I thought they were a really good chance in this tournament. And I didn't think there was a clear-cut favourite. So I kind of thought, you know, any of the first 3 or 4 teams were certainly the only ones that were a realistic chance of going anywhere. But you looked at them in this particular tournament and, early on, and I was like, they just can do lots of different things with the ball. And it gives them, you know, real flexibility that they can go with a spin-heavy lineup or they can go with a pace-heavy lineup at any stage, and they can take wickets in either direction. And you look at England and you're like, what's the most likelihood of England taking lots of wickets? Jofra aside, Al Rashid had a fantastic tournament, right?
Yep.
And we didn't know what we were going to get out of Jofra because it was Jofra. But again, you look at it and you're like, they're not a very good death bowling lineup, and they don't seem to take as many wickets as other teams. In the days when they automatically outscored everyone by a huge amount, it didn't matter as much. They don't look as automatic as they once did now. So they're now looking like the opposite of that sort of a Pakistan team, right? Where you're like, they're just one-sided in a different direction than Pakistan is. And there's so many questions. I think they're a fascinating team because, you know, a big reason why India is playing the way that they're playing, and probably even the way that South Africa started looking for wickets, a lot of that comes back to England changing the game a little bit. You know, West Indies obviously played a huge part in it as well. But certainly when it comes to the wicket side of thing and attacking and trying to take wickets, that was a huge thing that England worked out when no one else did. But after a while, everyone works it out. It's the same as Bazball, right? It's like Bazball's absolutely revolutionary until everyone else goes, oh, wait a minute, we can pick the bits out of Bazball we want to do. And when we play against Bazball, we can try this. And then things change massively from there.
Yeah. And I mean, if I look at India's batting innings over there, right? England's bowlers weren't up to the mark. I know Adil Rashid took 1 for 25 and that looks good on the scorecard, but that wasn't his best spell. He bowled a fair few full tosses. I felt like Livingston with his none for 24 actually bowled better at times and kept the runs down. But India did go off, completely. They were off to a flyer, and Rohit Sharma, who has had a fantastic tournament, smashed 57 of 39. And then Sky contributed with 47 runs of 36 as well. Then those two set it up, and Pandya, Akshar, Jadeja finished things off. India got to 171. No way in hell was England ever going to chase down 172 in Guyana, of all places, because that wicket was getting slow. And Jared, you pointed this out, the pavilion end, the ball was dying. It was barely bouncing from that end, right? So that was something that was also very, very crucial in this particular fixture.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's where it really helps, having a great bowling lineup compared to India. And India having a great bowling lineup and England having a okay bowling lineup. Because, we talked about this in our group chat before. India didn't even have to worry about that, right? So with England, you were like, they tried to work it out. You could see them trying to work out how best to use that end into their advantage. Whereas with India, they were like, well, let's just bowl Kuldeep and Jasprit at the other end.
Yeah.
And they're not going to score off them anyway.
That was so
and they're
smart.
Yeah.
Another
and
team
then
would have given Bumrah the ball from the pavilion end, but India gave or Rohit gave Bumrah the ball from the media end because
Well,
it
I think
doesn't matter with Jasprit Bumrah.
I think someone in our group said that. They said, oh, he'll bowl from that end. I was like, oh, that's not where I would bowl him. I'd bowl him from the other end because no one's going to hit him anyway. And
the conditions or format or phase of the game does not matter for Jasprit Bumrah, so you utilize the other bowlers from that pavilion end. Genius.
Yeah. So, I think it was absolutely brilliant from that perspective. They looked so much better than England. England really didn't look like a semi-finalist all that much in that game, and maybe they weren't. You could make a solid argument that Australia and the West Indies, maybe had slightly better tournaments than England, all things considered. But that's not how the tournament works. And well done for England to making it through and doing it at the right time when Australia certainly didn't and the West Indies certainly didn't. But it just looked, you were just watching that going, I wonder how Australia, and so someone's put a question in about the whole fixing the Guyana wicket situation, which the Guyana wicket wasn't fixed. In fact, I would say, if anything, that was actually not as much of a Guyana wicket as you usually would see.
There were more runs in it than you would expect in Guyana.
So the whole idea of it being fixed for India is not actually what ended up happening anyway, which is why most of these comments don't usually hold water and everything else.
Just on that, I'm sorry, this is a complete segue and this is probably an uncovered topic, but I just want to bring this up since we're talking about it. Michael Vaughan went on this rant in which he said that, they've set up India to win this tournament and there's no reserve day and India were penciled in to play in Guyana from the get-go. We knew these things from the start. Why are they mattering now? We all know that, the ICC wanted to make the most of the Indian market because that's the time slot which favors the Indian market. It's capitalism. It's a broadcaster's decision.
This is why the Michael Vaughan comments after the game are stupid, right? Because I said before the tournament, I'm worried about England's bowling of spin, and I don't think they play spin very well. Where were the two semi-finals, Bayram?
In Trinidad and Guyana.
So to make the final, right, you had to bowl spin well or play spin well against another semi-finalist, right? That's true. And that's why that sort of stuff is nonsensical. On top of that, it's why this tournament was so tough, right?
Also, Jared, just on that, had India finished second in their group and this game got rained out, India would have gotten knocked out. So how is that setting India up for success? It's complete nonsense. And it's not the first time we've seen something like that from Michael Vaughan. The two teams
that make the final had to go through New York, right?
Yeah.
Which was not set, like Australia and England ended up, because they played in the Caribbean, that was a massive advantage towards the end. Now, they might not have been as well suited to those conditions as certainly South Africa and no doubt India were. But they got their time over there, whereas what were the Indian and the South African batters doing in the USA? So yeah, there's a lot of bullshit talk. I still don't think we should be picking when a team has a semi-final. I don't think I have huge problems with the fixture list, and I've been talking about them for about a decade now. It's funny how people think I've just started talking about them now, but I've been talking about them for a decade.
Jared, we both discussed weeks ago, maybe a month ago, on Uncovered how that semi-final not having a reserve day is bizarre, right? Why are you talking about now? That's my only issue, and just because it's happening to England now, it's an issue. I don't know, man. It was a bit infuriating. But coming back to the game, right? There was only one way that England could have won this semi-final if they went absolutely berserk in the power play. Buttler and Salt, those are the kind of batters who could get you 80 off 30. But Buttler and Salt were both removed early on in the piece. Buttler was looking good as well. And when he got out, half the game was done. And when Bumrah got Salt with that peach, I think it was game, set, match. England needed to capitalize in the power play, but they got to 39 for the loss of 3 wickets in the power play. And there were some moments as well where I felt like maybe things could have changed for them. Phil Salt could have caught Rohit Sharma, but couldn't.
That was a big one, wasn't it?
Time. That was a massive one. Also, explain to me why Jos Buttler, on a surface like Guyana, which we know will get difficult to bat on as the game progresses, elected to bat first when he won the toss. That was a weird one for me. And he's really defended himself over there. He's ready to die on that hill, Jos Buttler and his attacking champions.
He bowl first. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. No. It's right. You just confused me. Because that game's like, that final is blowing the rest of my cricket. I was like, wait, have I misremembered that game?
No, that's Freudian slip from my end.
Yeah, I did a whole video about this, of course. So it's certainly out there. And, you know, it's my views on it are very, very clear. I just think that teams are setting themselves up to fail by this whole we have to bowl first every single time angle. And England is the main proponent of that. And, you know, I made that video before England lost. I wrote the script to that before England lost that game, which was quite funny. So yes, I do think that's a bit of an issue. So someone put a comment in, I can't remember who it was, might have been King, who put a comment in saying England always play one way attacking because that approach they won 2 World Cups. If you go back and you have a look, they actually won the World Cups. Like the 2019 was not an attacking game from them. And the 2022 was not a particularly attacking game. So they actually have other levers.
Fascinating.
Yeah. When I'm talking about one style of cricket, I don't have any issue with them attacking. I think it's great. I think they've changed limited overs cricket forever, right?
Absolutely.
Like them and a combination of them and the West Indies has just been fantastic. And now we're seeing the IPL opening it up even further. What we're talking about with one style is they have to win the game with the bat, right?
Yeah.
And South Africa and India and Australia and even the West Indies, well, actually, maybe less so the West Indies, which might be that they might be a little bit more like England. But those other 3 teams are multi-dimensional, which means they can beat you in many different ways, right? Whereas Afghanistan, Pakistan, you would have to put there as well, Sri Lanka, you know, England, those sorts of teams, very one-sided. Doesn't mean that their one side isn't brilliant. Right. Yeah. And I think at their absolute best, England were gifted with a bunch of really good all-rounders, which meant they could bat to 9, 10, and 11, which means their batters could go as hard as they wanted. And they had multiple options. And, you know, in those days, Moeen Ali was batting better. And, you know, Ben Stokes could still get you overs and all these sorts of things. It's, you know, Liam Plunkett doesn't play for them anymore, right? They, you know, Mark Wood has never replaced that role. Jofra Archer isn't quite the bowler that he used to be. Moeen Ali and Will Jacks are not the Moeen Ali of before. It's just all those sorts of things. So it's just not as strong on both sides of the ball. And I think that's what we saw in the semi-final.
There was a lot of debate on whether Moeen Ali should have played that game if he wasn't going to bowl because Will Jacks was, you know, on the bench. But all in all, I feel like England were far from their best. And it's an old adage, right, that batters win you games, bowlers win you tournaments. And yeah, Jasprit Bumrah won India the World Cup, more or less. And I mean, I literally feel like Jos Buttler, when he opted to field first in that game, he shot himself and England in the foot. That was a very, very wrong call in my books. But anyway, let's go on to the other semi-final, right? The first one, South Africa absolutely obliterated Afghanistan in Trinidad. They bowled them out for 56 in 11.5 overs and then chased down that total in 8.5 overs. That surface, however, Jared, it was basically New York's twin sibling, if not worse, and the bounce was dangerously inconsistent over here as well, and it was simply not fit for a World Cup semi-final. Jonathan Trott also voiced that opinion. When I was watching that first innings, I literally thought, okay, this pitch has some spice, and South Africa have bowled exceptionally well, and it's not dangerous, up until Quinton de Kock copped one in the rib cage, and then I was like, okay, all right, now that definitely looks like it's dangerous. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people were saying that's simply not a T20 wicket. Well, good luck playing a test match on that, probably done in a day. It wasn't a fit surface for a World Cup semi-final. And why the hell has this World Cup, you know, given us these sort of moments or surfaces over and over and over again?
Yeah, so I think the best way of looking at this is I just did a radio show in SEM with Sumo and Mark Richardson, and we were talking about this, and Richardson was saying, it's been a really good tournament, Jared. Like, you know, the bowlers have been back on top. And I was like, yeah, unfortunately, then we had 2 surfaces that weren't up to scratch. Yeah. And so no one, I mean, most of us, there are some people who was just, you know, absolutely nuts. But no one was actually sitting there really thinking that there was a problem that the bowlers were back on top. Where we thought there was a problem was when some of the surfaces weren't really fit for international cricket. And by that we mean that the ball doesn't bounce where it should be bouncing from a ball to ball. If you hit one ball back of a length and it goes 2 bounces through the wicketkeeper and another one springs up at you at your throat, that's an unsafe wicket. Yeah. Now, we were pretty harsh on New York, right?
Very harsh. We did a foot marks on it.
The Trinidad wicket was absolutely terrible, right? Absolutely dreadful. And it's a real embarrassment to the ICC that was a World Cup semi-final. The two,
Embarrassment might be an understatement, Jared.
The four most important games in this World Cup, right, were India-Pakistan, the two semi-finals and the final, and two of those were on wickets that were not fit for professional cricket.
Yeah.
Right?
You could throw in the pavilion end bounce in Guyana as well, potential. Was it Guyana? Yes, it was. Not
yeah, it wasn't.
dangerous,
I mean,
but
again,
weird.
yeah. I mean, it wasn't good. There was some weirdness from that. I would say that's within the margins of. I mean, the Guyana wicket's just crazy at the best of times, right? So we don't have any issue with that. But you're right. I do understand what you mean from that point of view. And there we are, right? It's just not ideal, and unfortunately, that's what's happened.
It's so unfortunate for Afghanistan because they won the toss and they were a bat first team, right? That's what they were always going to do, and they did go ahead. Rashid Khan elected to bat, and it kind of bit them in the back. It backfired. And Janssen and Gurbaz, two players who had injury scares in their final Super 8 games, they were both declared fit to play that particular semi-final. And Janssen got Gurbaz for a duck. Now, we all know Afghanistan were a team heavily reliant on their opening batting pair, right? Gurbaz and Ibrahim Zadran, every game that they won, they had put up a stand and had scored the bulk of Afghanistan's runs. I remember you telling me prior to the semi that that pair had scored 57.2%, I think, of Afghanistan's runs. Yeah, and they were like in the top 5 run scorers of the tournament as well. We all knew how critical this particular, pair was towards Afghanistan's success. But let's be honest, on that surface, Afghanistan never truly stood a chance because South Africa's bowlers were already like breathing fire. And then you give them that surface, that's game, set, match.
Yeah, I mean, I think where this game would have been embarrassing is if South Africa bat first. And they get bowled out for 75 or 85. Now, I don't think it suited the Afghanistan bowlers as much as it did South Africa. So maybe that doesn't quite happen. But if that does happen, and we all know that Afghanistan are a very flawed team who've now got into the final on the basis of a wicket that wasn't up to semi-final standard, that would have been huge. And again, it's just, there's no reason. If Afghanistan make it because Gurbaz and Ibrahim get them to 150 and their bowlers bowl magnificently, we're all going to go, that's how they've been winning their games. We're okay with that. But if they make it because Fazal Farooqi is making the ball dance like he's put some nails down on the wicket beforehand, then there's a part of us just goes, well, and you can even argue that for South Africa, right? Like I thought going into that game, if that was the sort of normal Trinidad wicket I'm used to as someone who's, worked in the IPL and worked in the CPL and watched the CPL before. I thought if it was that kind of wicket, I thought Afghanistan had a really good chance. So Afghanistan actually had less of a chance of winning that game because of the actual surface that it was played on. Yeah. And again, that's not like, oh, it's spinning a lot or, oh, it's for fast bowlers, whatever. That's literally saying this wicket is really unplayable and shouldn't be used for a World Cup semi-final.
Yeah, and everyone did say that, of course, and Jonathan Trott was quite vocal about it as well. The commentators were. But another thing that they were speaking about, the commentators in particular, was the potential fatigue factor Afghanistan might have faced, right? Their flight got delayed, and they didn't get there in time to have any training sessions in Trinidad. How much of that do you think factored in? I know it's a problem-solving tournament, Jared, but surely these things have fixes.
Yeah, it's... Look, I think there was some really tough scheduling. I think India, Australia, Afghanistan, towards the end, had some crappy scheduling. And obviously Sri Lanka had it at the start. That's how you win World Cups. And the thing is that they're not that good a team. So they probably needed South Africa to have the bad scheduling and for them to have the good scheduling, right? They played a great tournament. I don't think the preparation is what caused the problem. I think the fact that the ball was zipping around like it had a mind of its own was the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it was one hell of an innings to witness. I had stayed up for that, particular semi. I stayed up for a lot of games this month. I've barely slept this month. I'm sure Jared hasn't slept much either. Yeah. And I was initially hoping for a thriller. And then I start watching that game, and Janssen takes 3 wickets in the power play. Rabada bowls a double wicket maiden. Afghanistan are 23 for 5, then 28 for 5 after the power play, and then Nokia strikes right after. He takes a brace of wickets, 2 for him, including that delivery to Rashid Khan in which the stump did a cartwheel. Shamsi took 3 wickets, all 3 LBWs. Poles everywhere, and I mean, for me, that is kind of the best sight in cricket. I know that wicket was, an abomination, but it was still kind of entertaining to watch all those stumps cartwheel. It was fun.
Oh, no, I mean, look, I like bowling wickets. I was kind of excited at the start of this tournament to see Guyana. I probably would have it doesn't work, but I would have loved it if it was Guyana and St. Lucia and you didn't know who was going to get which semi-final, just because it's like, good luck working out what your squad should be. And the thing about the 2 semi-finals both being on wickets that spinners traditionally do well on, kind of took that fun away a little bit, right? And then you're going to Barbados, which is more of an even wicket in some ways. Certainly between bat and ball, anyway. And I understood those are the 3 biggest places, biggest cricket audiences. I'm not having a go. Guyana deserves, even if their wicket is always going to be what it is, which is, and that was, I still think that was probably a good Guyana wicket, considering a lot of the cricket that I've seen.
And Trinidad barely got any games, right? They got the semi, but
they also had 2. They had, I mean, Trinidad. It was a bit crazy there. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that, you get to a point where I think this World Cup is entertaining because it's bowler dependent, right? You almost have to take away the whole nonsense of the New York and the Trinidad thing. But I thought that was the charm of this World Cup. We're going to think of it as a bowler-dependent World Cup. And if you think about it, 2 of the best 3 bowling attacks made it through to the final. And then you had Afghanistan make it through the semi-finals. The only really good bowling attack that was fantastic that didn't do anything is probably Sri Lanka, right? And they never really started in this tournament. But I think that's fantastic that we, it was such a bowler-dependent tournament. And India, I said from the start, just such variety in what they could do and everything else. Absolutely, completely. They deserved a title so many years over, but this is the best bowling attack that they had all the way through, certainly in T20. And so I'm glad that them and South Africa made the final and Afghanistan made the semi-final. But you're right, it's great to see the stumps flying in Trinidad. It would have been better if they were flying just because of great bowling and not because the wicket was shit heap.
That wicket was horrendous, of course. I mean, Azmatullah was Afghanistan's highest scorer, the only batter to get to double digits, and that to the lower end of double digits. He scored 10. The highest run scorer in that innings was Extras. Extra scored 13, right? That tells you a story. And even South Africa, when they started, Fazal Faruqi, he cleaned up, quitted de Kock, and South Africa could have been 6 for 2 had Afghanistan, appealed or sent that decision to DRS. They didn't, and who's to say, maybe more wickets would have been lost, but overall, I felt
just a comment I just wanted to say that Karen Rathod said, West Indies recent times not producing the best T20 wickets. Just look at the CPL average score. I'm pretty sure that this tournament was way lower than the average CPL score. And I think in the last couple of years, or at least one of those years in the CPL, there was a higher scoring year. So these wickets were even well different than that. But Karen, if you want to know about all this, I said this was going to be a low scoring World Cup beforehand because we've never had a high scoring World Cup. I didn't think it would be this low scoring, but I thought it would be towards the lower end. And a lot of that was the New York wicket, which played a part. And also, they played a couple of games on the Florida wicket when it was still wet, right? So that probably didn't help anything.
Recorded a footmarks called Cloudy with a chance of 6s or something along those lines before the T20 World Cup and after the IPL, talking about this. And we both predicted it would be a low-scoring World Cup, but we thought it would be, it wouldn't be the lowest-scoring World Cup, right? So that's something that we definitely got. Coming back to Afghanistan, of course, I never thought that I would talk about this game on Overthrows, but it was such a wildly, stupidly entertaining fixture, Jared, that I can't not bring up that thriller between Afghanistan and Bangladesh in Kingstown. Catches were dropped in both innings. Barely any runs were scored by either team. Bangladesh were on top for so much of that game. They didn't even give themselves a shot at qualification when they needed 40 runs off 3 overs, something like that. And then they ultimately lost that game in the same game where they had an opportunity to qualify for the semis. I don't even know what to make of it. It was so bizarre.
So someone in the comments before, and of course they did this because it's the internet and it's about cricket, said, "Oh, Jared doesn't like India. He doesn't want them to be dominant." Literally, I've been so upset that India hasn't won a World Cup because I hate it when teams get really good for a long period of time and don't win something, right? You want to hear me be angry about a team? Wait till I talk about Bangladesh. Like, what on the fuck are they doing at any stage? Like, I just don't understand. Did they forget that Ridoy could play? Right?
I don't know why they demoted him for so long. It was so stupid.
So stupid. And you're watching it and you're sitting there going, I remember I was, I had a bunch of friends on the WhatsApp and we were chatting and I was like, so Ridoy in next? Yeah, Ridoy in next. No Ridoy in next. Ridoy in next? Yeah, Ridoy. We just kept saying it to each other. And then it got to what? The third or the fourth wicket. We're like, we came in for the fourth wicket. So it must have been the second or third wicket. We're like, what are they thinking? He was the only guy that was going to put any pressure back on. And it just didn't. He was also one of their more informed batters in the tournament. Like, I know he didn't make like a ton of runs, but you watch him on some of those dodgy wickets and you're like, he's seeing the ball okay. The rest of their batters did not look like they were seeing the ball. It's just, I didn't understand the way that they played at all. It was really, I guess, I find Bangladesh limited overs cricket really, really frustrating.
They should have thrown the kitchen sink at it, right? Because Simon Dool was even frustrated with this, that you have an opportunity to qualify for the semi-final and now you're just trying to make sure Afghanistan don't make it. Give yourselves a shot. Liton Das carried his bat for 54, right? He was opener, never got out. No one else could bat. Their bowlers did so well. Rishad Hussain was one of the finds at the tournament. He took 3 for 26.
Yeah.
The Fizz took 1 for 17. Taskeen in 3.5 overs was 1 for 6 until Rashid hit him for a maximum, and then he was 1 for 12.
Just to go back as well, we talked about it before, of another team with a really good bowling attack. Right? Now, I think a lot of it maybe was to do with form and everything else. Everything sort of fell in together. But again, like they had a really good bowling attack, and they basically had you, me, and 4 guys from the comments section batting for them at times. Like it was so grim watching them out there trying to bat, right? And, you always get the people going, you go, oh, Bangladesh isn't any good. Bangladesh bowled as well as they ever have in a World Cup before in this tournament.
They got themselves won these many games either prior to this T20 World Cup.
And they got themselves within the chance of a semi-final and they didn't go for it. So if you want to sit there and go, oh, Bangladesh are always rubbish. We're not talking about whether they're always rubbish. We're talking about the fact that they didn't actually try and win the game in the required rate that they needed to get to the semi-final. That's not talking about them being rubbish. That's well beyond rubbish. They didn't actually go for the total. Who does that?
His shit on Twitter. He was not having any of it. And even apart from Bangladesh not going for the total or, the specified over mark in which they had to chase that to qualify for the semis, there was so much weird shit that went down in this game, and I'm gonna piece this down for you. It started off with that Gurbaz glove rip. Remember that?
Yes.
His entire finger on the glove just went poof, and then there was some comical running by Afghanistan in which both the batters
Can I just stop you? Is poof like an adequate sound effect for a rip?
No, it's probably not. It's more like a fairy godmother granting you a wish. Yeah, but there was that, and then that Afghanistan moment where both batters were running towards the same end twice. It was like a race to either end, and Bangladesh still could not manage a run out over there. Then there was that Rashid Khan bat throw towards Kareem Jannat when Kareem did not attempt that second run and Rashid couldn't get strike. Gulbuddin faking a hamstring injury when it started to rain and Afghanistan were on top as per the DLS method, and then came on to bowl 2 of the greatest overs he'll ever bowl, after that Australia game, of course. That was the best he'll ever bowl. And Ian Smith and Simon Dool taking the absolute piss out of him. Yeah, it was wild, it was stupid, it was entertaining in so many ways, and I don't think I've seen so many crazy things happening in one particular T20 game. Forget like 50 overs of Test cricket. This was as much as they could possibly happen in 240 deliveries.
I just think that that's one thing I really liked about this tournament was how many close games we got and how many sort of crazy games we got, right? And all the way through. And, we don't need to talk about this game. it didn't impact the tournament. It wasn't even on India's radar. India had already qualified by that point, so India would have still won this tournament regardless of that game. And it just kept giving us great moments all this tournament all the way through, and that was a fantastic game. Like, it's the kind of game that, you know, hardcore fans, the sort of people that are in the comments here with us and everything else, are gonna be in a situation where we're gonna remember it forever, because it was just so stupid all the way through. Like the Rashid Khan, I mean, you threw out the Rashid Khan thing as if to say, oh yeah, he threw his bat. He threw his bat at his batting partner.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single time I've ever seen that, unless there's a run out. Like, if there's a run out, you know, this wasn't a run out.
Point for it as well, of course, rightly so.
It was just absolutely bizarre. I loved every moment of it. It was crazy, and we saw some crazy games. There's some stupid games, like the Oman Namibia game, and one of my favorite games in this tournament was Papua New Guinea Namibia. Papua New Guinea Uganda, right? Where you're just like, well, Papua New Guinea's made no runs, and still Uganda made it look like it was, what were they chasing, like 65 or 75 or something? And it was torturous. I absolutely loved this all the way through.
The torture in this game in particular was fun at the same time. And then Gulbuddin, of course, people have different opinions on it. There were 10,000 ways to slow the game down, and he chose to clutch his hamstring in the slips. The commentators had a lot of fun with that. Just some performances from that game. Of course, Rashid Khan was splendid, scored an unbeaten 19 off 10 deliveries, which came out to be crucial runs towards the end, and he took 4 for 23. Was not the player of the match, however. Naveen ul Haq took 4 for 26, and that sequence at the end, he drops Lit on Das, then he cleans up Taskeen, and then he has the Fizz out LBW, all in the space of 3 deliveries to win Bangladesh the game. Then Fazal Farooqi maybe wasn't at his best in that particular game, but ended up with 17 wickets, which is the joint most ever in a single edition of the T20 World Cup. Jonathan Trott has done a fantastic job coaching this team, Jared, and he's been with them for quite a while. They've crossed a major milestone in their cricketing history over here. They've finally made an ICC tournament semi-final. This is a massive moment in Afghanistan cricket's history. It's a watershed moment, and Afghan fans can be very excited with, you know, what the future has to hold, because once you cross that first kind of barrier, you'd only hope that things will get better here on, and we could potentially see a meteoric rise someday from Afghan cricket.
Yeah, I mean, who is their third best batter in this tournament?
Gulbuddin, who was throwing the kitchen hamstring at it versus South Africa.
I mean, look, I think they had, I mean, you go back to Kenya in 2003, even Sri Lanka in 1996, despite the fact that Sri Lanka were probably still the best team. Sometimes you just have a very good run, right? And a lot of things go in your favor, you know, even when they lost games early on. You know, they lost games that didn't matter, like the West Indies game, right? And the India game. They kept putting themselves in. Brilliant effort to overcome Bangladesh in that game. The game against Australia was even, you know, more special. Love the way they played against New Zealand and everything else. But they are the most baffling team when you think they made the World Cup semi-finals with like 5 players, right? Like, it really was the performances of about 5 players.
They knocked out New Zealand. Great. They knocked out Australia. Bangladesh knocked out themselves, but they kind of knocked them out as well. They reached semi-finals for the first ever time, and I mean, the streets of Kabul and Kandahar were flooded. It was a massive, massive moment, and you're right to say that it's not like it was a team performance. It was the opening pair with the bat. It was, you know, Rashid Khan plus the seamers. I think Naveen and Fazal Farooqi were both very, very consistent and consistently good. Mohammad Nabi was still out there, but he didn't really do much apart from like not dropping a catch. It was a funny tournament, and Afghanistan were at the forefront of the funniness of it. And I loved their semi-final run. I hope to see more of it in the future.
Look, I still think they've got a nice little core. They've got some interesting players there. And I love watching them in this tournament. But, you know, it was... And look, we saw that with... I remember the 2012 Australian team was another team where I just remember thinking... You take Shane Watson out of this team, and I'm not sure they would have beaten many of the associate sides. And sometimes that happens, but that one player, or those few players in this case, the openers, really the difference. Because, you know, Nepal, Bangladesh, you know, there were lots of teams with kind of good suffocating bowling lineups. But you needed to match that with some batting, and Afghanistan found 2 batters, and good on them. Absolutely brilliant.
Yep. And Afghan fans, congratulations to you. You can look forward to a bright future. Let's take a break. We have some women's cricket to talk about, and then we have to take some super chats as well. You guys are watching Overthrows with Behram and Jared, and we'll be back after this short ad.
This is brought to you by Cricket 8. They are a new player in the game trying to educate fans on what is really happening in cricket. We have a partnership with them where we host live watch-alongs, do podcasts, and write articles. If you want to know what is really happening with our game, visit cricket8.com. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.
Welcome back to Overthrows. You guys are with Jared and Behram. We're going to talk about some women's cricket, which we've made a regular feature on the show. Just to inform everybody, we're not going to be covering the test match that is currently ongoing between India and South Africa. Just because if we cover that now, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do next week on Overthrows. So we'll leave that one for now. The West Indies are currently in Sri Lanka, and they had lost 4 limited overs games on the bounce versus Sri Lanka. And then they produced one of the great turnarounds, that we've seen. Won the T20I series, 2-1. And Affy Fletcher, is it? The leg break bowler took 4 for 23 in 1. And I love how there is this, nice little back and forth between all of these teams that are below Australia, England, and India. They're all kind of, beating each other every now and then. There's no sure shot winner, and it's in a great competitive space, women's cricket.
We've talked about that a lot. I mean, I think it's fantastic that we're seeing upsets and we're seeing one team win this series and then lose the next series to a team you think is more or less the same. And, I think there's been some really interesting women's cricket played now for a good period of time. I mean, Sri Lanka were good, then they went bad again, and then they've obviously got good. West Indies probably quite similar. But, Bangladesh and Pakistan rising has been really, really important. And probably also South Africa and New Zealand slipping has helped,
they've declined.
Right? Yeah. So it's, some teams are on the rise, some teams are not. I think it's a very fascinating time for women's cricket. I'm really interested to see what happens in that tournament in Bangladesh.
Yeah, and congratulations to the West Indies on coming back in that series and winning it, because beating Sri Lanka anyway these days is a bit of a challenge. They've done exceptionally well in recent times, and then they've defeated them in their own backyard. So it's a good away win after their victory versus Pakistan away from home as well. Coming to the series, the ODI series that England are currently playing with New Zealand, England trounced the White Ferns in the first 2 ODIs. And Charlie Dean took 4 wickets in the first ODI, then 2 in the second. Sophie Eccleston took 2 wickets in the first ODI and 5 in the second. That spin bowling duo has been absolutely unplayable. And then you've got Sarah Glenn as well. England are looking dangerous when it comes to their spinners. And I mean, in a World Cup year in Bangladesh, that really, puts them in a very nice position. And we've had this conversation plenty of times as well, haven't we?
Yeah, no, I'm really fascinated to see how that tournament goes with the England spinners specifically. I think that's it's one of the more interesting things that I've been thinking about, coming into that tournament, especially, well, there is spinner will be interesting just because that's not normal Bangladesh, but left arm finger spin in Bangladesh is, so I hear sometimes it works well.
Yeah. Sophie Eccleston or Radha Yadav, who's the leading wicket taker of that T20 World Cup, Jared? It's a tough one, isn't it?
I think it's Radha Yadav because I think she's shorter. Oh, maybe it doesn't matter on the Bangladesh wickets.
I mean, I feel like Sophie's the best spinner currently in all of women's cricket.
It's a very good question. Yeah, if you can keep the stumps in play every ball over there, I think you can have a magnificent tournament. And so I just think that, although it's not that Eccleston comes over, but yeah, you're right. I probably have Eccleston slightly higher, but I think maybe it could be a slightly shorter bowler. I'm assuming they're shorter. I haven't seen cricket viz data. I don't know where they actually released the ball from.
Time will tell, of course. One final point, of course, when it comes to England's batting, it's also been pretty good. The openers have done fantastically well. Tammy Beaumont was unbeaten on 76 in the first ODI, but she's not the star of the show. The star of the show is someone who you don't even like as far as her name is concerned. 67 in the first ODI and an unbeaten 100 of 88 deliveries in the second. Maya Bouchier, she's not South African. She's English, and what a series she has had thus far.
Yeah, I haven't been following that this much, but she just keeps popping up in my timeline, so she must be doing quite well. Or maybe people are just tagging me in her stuff now.
Absolutely. Anyway, let's move on to the super chats. We can wrap this up and then move towards Uncovered. And Yash Palmer is here with the first question. He's saying or asking, is making Gautam Gambhir head coach a mistake? What about your choice? Well, I mean, we've spoken about this plenty of times.
Yeah, I think we talked about it a lot. I think we've gone into the details of it. Whether it's a mistake or not, I don't get into those kinds of conversations. Yeah. Where I started it is, what kind of coach were they looking for? And then did they do their due diligence to get in the best position as possible? It doesn't really feel like that from the outside, but I haven't been following it all that much because there's been a World Cup going on at the same time.
If India or the BCCI want a guy to say that India are the best country in the world and those 11 players are the best in the world and they're going to kick everyone's ass, then Gautam Gambhir is the right guy to coach them. And if they wanted someone more technical, maybe they should have offered more money to Dravid and convince him to stay on for a bit.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I mean, obviously everyone's got an amount, but as you know, I talked to Raul just before the World Cup. He did not look like a man that you could offer an extra amount of money to. But yeah, they're very different coaches, I suppose. So it's the better conversation at the moment, Yash, is the Matthew Mott one. So Matthew Mott was hired for England to keep the train going in the right direction. He wins the World Cup, and now we can't tell if the train's going in the right direction. So is Matthew Mott the next coach that can go on from that? And then you look at Gambhir and you're like, did they just want another coach that was like Rahul Dravid and there wasn't one and they weren't willing to take a lesser name? Or is the other thing is they were like, no, we would like that sort of more rah-rah coach, that sort of Darren Lehman style coach, which is also fine, right? But again, it's hard to tell really what they were trying to do.
Yeah. They had a Google document or whatever, so anyone could have applied. And they weren't looking for any Australian legends as per Jay Shah. Remember that piece, guys. Akshu Dhavala with the next question. Very generous donation. Thank you, Akshu. He says, I remember a question recently comparing this Indian generation with the Sri Lankan golden generation. And this win probably gave him a similar feeling to when Sri Lanka won in 2014. The next generation should fare better than Sri Lanka's. Well, of course, you're talking about India. It's a powerhouse, so much talent coming in. Of course, they'll fare better. But had India lost this World Cup, right, at that final, who's to say maybe these guys would have gone, without winning a trophy for more than 11 years, and that narrative would have been something as well. And something
this generation.
Media,
yeah, so I think this particular generation, actually, they still would have felt like they missed out on something. And that's what you're talking about with the Sri Lanka generation, which is, I mentioned this in my video, actually. I don't know if you picked it up, but in the video I had about India's thing, that's how I felt as well, which was Sri Lanka just should have won a title and it took forever. And when they won in 2014, I was so happy. I didn't really know anyone from the team at that stage or that I can remember, but I was just so happy because I was like, this is a team that deserved it. And I feel exactly the same way when India won yesterday. And I would have felt great if South Africa had won it, but in a slightly different way. South Africa would have been more a 30-year journey, right? 32-year journey. Whereas for India, I'm just like, I'm sick and tired of these players. I was told on the verge of that final that about 4 of those guys needed to be dropped again, right? Yeah. And you're like, they're unbeaten coming into a final. The conversation around India, and that's why when someone said before in the comments, he doesn't like, I wanted India to win because these players deserved a trophy many times over. Right? And that's what you're talking about with the Sri Lanka thing. And Sri Lanka's was a shorter period as well. And also it wasn't talked about as much. And you look at who Sri Lanka went up against, right? They went up, they were just unlucky from that point of view. Whereas India got themselves in situations when they probably should have won and didn't. So it's slightly different and over a longer period of time with more scrutiny. But I'm with you. NBA is a perfect example to me. When Dirk Nowitzki, there was so much nonsense about Dirk Nowitzki. And then when the Mavericks won the title, that's all they ever won, right? Like they didn't go on to be this great side afterwards, but you couldn't put shit on that team anymore because they had won. And India might not win the next 3 or 4 World Cup. I mean, who the fuck knows, what will happen next? And Sri Lanka, that was it for them.
True.
But that generation, they finally got the trophy for their hard work. And that, I think, for me, is a really important thing in sport. Yeah. If you are that good for that long, even little things like, do you remember when Delhi were really good for like 2 or 3 years in the IPL and they didn't win a title? That annoyed me, right? I just, when you're that good over a period of time, sorry, I just realized we've already had that one. When you're that good over a period of time, you deserve a victory. And if not, you end up getting seen as not handling the pressure, chokers, and all this other stuff. And this channel is not about that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And so all that sort of stuff annoys me.
Interesting parallel is that in 2014, Virat Kohli was the star of the show. And in this particular World Cup, in that one, he lost in the final. This final that he won, he made more or scored more runs in the final than he did all tournament. 76 in the final, 75 in the tournament. And now, he's won one of those trophies in which he had a poor tournament, barring the final. So, yeah, sport is funny. Path right winger, as always, he is a regular feature in the Super Chats. This time he says, agree with the blue balls analogy. Was 14 during the 2011 World Cup and a KKR fan as well. And he has been climaxing after a decade. And he does not see what the fuss is about. What do we think, or who morally won, India, South Africa, Afghanistan, or the USA?
I think they all had great tournaments. I mean, India did what they've been trying to do for 11 years. And, a great generation of players needed a trophy. South Africa played cricket to within an inch of winning a trophy. And also, I know it's a small thing, but they got past the semi-final. Afghanistan, what an effort for them to get to where they did. I thought they played brilliant cricket. Even if it was only 5 players, those 5 players played as good cricket as maybe as good cricket as England's 8 or 9 best players did, right?
Also, I think Gulbuddin Naib morally won.
He definitely. And then the USA, I don't know what the long-term effects of this is, but the USA getting to that second round and having that win over Pakistan and playing that great game against India and that great game against Canada as well.
And South Africa. That game versus South Africa was amazing. They could have won it.
Yes, yeah, that was a good one too, wasn't it? So I think, the USA, so all of those teams have done great. In India and Afghanistan are probably the ones that, from a cricket perspective, have done the most. But, there's 2 ways of looking at the South Africa one. They got past the semi-final, and so that's great. And they got past the semi-final, and the same thing happened again, and so it doesn't matter. But from a USA point of view, we won't know what the moral ramifications are of this for a long period. But just happy that they played and they played. So I enjoyed watching them play cricket. And, for me, that's enough.
They're not slated to play any full member side up until the 2026 T20 World Cup. So that does kind of suck for the USA. Anyway, Noel Korath, apologies if I butchered your name. He says, just an appreciation post for both of you. Amazing content and analysis of the game. And I also follow Pro Sports just to hear everything again in Hindi. Well, thank you so much, Noel. And I love how the Pro Sports and Good Areas algos have mixed. Everyone from there is coming here. Everyone from there is going there. And it's great for me because I'm, spearheading both of those efforts.
You're everywhere, man.
Sydney Cockman says, do you think Arshdeep will become a good test player, or is his tendency to take his wickets too expensively just naturally suited to T20? I feel like his reliance on swinging the white ball early on is what makes him special, no? And
he should be able to do that in red ball cricket. I think his biggest issue is that he's not deadly accurate and he's not, fast. And, generally those sorts of players get found out. I thought he was really interesting. There was a period where he was swinging it both ways, and he seems to have lost that swing in the other direction, which I'm real shame. I thought that would have made him very interesting in Test cricket.
Yeah.
I think he's... look, I did a big video on him, I want to say a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years back. I find him a fascinating cricketer. I don't see him as a Test prospect, but I see him with his best ball is certainly really, really good in Test cricket. So I'd love to see him tried there. But, there are other bowlers that they have at the moment.
He can move the ball both ways. So, he is going to be contender, but maybe doesn't hit the wicket as hard. Maybe that's something that Indian selectors look at for Test cricket. Anyway, Deepak Raj says or asks, why does Quinton de Kock look like he is attacking at all times, but his overall strike rate doesn't quite reflect that in T20s? I feel like he has both gears. Sometimes he'll go berserk and sometimes he'll go into that anchor mode, which he did in this final. And that would have worked in theory had he not thrown away his wicket versus Arshdeep.
I think this is one of the best questions I've ever seen on this channel. Because I've been discussing in my mind for years about how good a T20 player he is, because his numbers aren't that great, right? For his talent. But, I think he's the second or third fastest scoring player in Test cricket history. He's not like that dynamic in T20 cricket, but he can be fantastic. and he can be really average. And I'm kind of with Deepak. Sometimes I think, whoa, he's going to take this game away. And then I look and he's like 20 off 16 or 20 off 18. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
How has that happened? And yeah, I have no answer to this, Deepak. And you've opened up a whole thing in my head. But I kind of see
lots of plays and misses with Quinton de Kock. I've noticed that.
Yeah, that could be it as well. I kind of think with QDK that, you know, he's probably a slightly above par opener, right? Like in, let's say, IPL or international cricket, but he's also not that next level or anywhere near that next level. But he has that gear available to him. But he also has the anchor gear in him, and he sort of gets a little bit confused. And sometimes you see him come out and he plays like 3 shots a ball.
Yeah.
And sometimes he comes out and you're like, is he awake? He's I just find him a fascinating cricketer from that point of view. I think that's a fantastic question of which I have no answer for.
No Dogma from Canada with 5 Canadian bucks. Thank you. No Dogma says, regarding whether South Africa choked, how do you think other teams such as Australia, England, or the West Indies would have performed with 30 of 30 needed with 6 wickets in hand against the same attack? Every one of those teams or any team in the world is playing Bumrah out. It's just that added so much pressure that Hardik got an assisted wicket. And Arshdeep, you've got to give credit to him. He bowled a terrific penultimate over. I felt like that death bowling sequence, Bumrah, Pandya, Bumrah, Arshdeep and Pandya, that was as well as Rohit could have organised those guys at that point.
I mean, I thought it was a really good wicket for Hardik Pandya, which is why I wanted him to bowl earlier as well. But I thought he bowled really well. This is really interesting. Who bats at 7 and 8 for England? I think Chris Jordan's at 8, so I'm assuming Sam Curran's at 7.
Well, they often promote Sam Curran. Sometimes Livingston comes in at 7 as well.
So compare that to Janssen and Maharaj. Have I got that right? 7 and 8? Yeah, I got that right. Australia would have had Wade.
Yep.
And Cummins with Stark coming in behind.
That's still better.
Yep. And then West Indies. I'm trying to think of West Indies' final lineup.
Sherfane Rutherford comes in at 7, doesn't he?
Yeah, and who comes in at 8?
Akil Hussain.
That's an interesting one. That one's a little bit more interesting. I look at it more that way. No Dogma. Whereas that's not the way that you ask this question. You ask this question of those other teams would have handled it because they would have handled the pressure better or if you're out. But that's not the way I look at it. I look at it as they were actually set up better to be in a situation like that than South Africa.
No one else has a Klaasen either who would get them to that position, 30 of 30.
Well, I don't think you're right there because, you know, Salt,
True.
you know...
different players in different positions, that's true.
No, but you know what I mean? Like, Head, Maxwell, you know... and
Dre Russ...
Puran
also could come in at 7, actually.
Yeah. So I think those teams do also have that. You're right. They're all slightly different roles, but they all have players who could have got them to that position. But the point is that once you're in that position, South Africa's at a disadvantage over every other team. And look, I started writing about this. I want to say 2019 World Cup might have been the first time I started writing about this back on Cricket Info. That's 5 years ago, Baron. I've been writing about this issue and I've done a video on their T20 team. I've done a video on their one-day team. I've done a video on their test team because they have the same issue in all 3 formats and they're rolling the dice. Well, that's the thing when you roll the dice is sometimes the dice don't bounce the way you want them to.
Fair enough. Bart 8881 says there seems to be quite a few parallels in the World Cup arcs of Rohit and Virat and Sangha and Mahela and their respective teams. Is that a fair comparison or too reductive? Feel like it's fair in terms of them, you know, being part of a golden generation and not winning a trophy for over a decade. But Sangha and Mahela had never won anything, whereas Rohit and Virat had a Champions Trophy each, and Rohit had a T20 World Cup and Virat had a 50-over World Cup.
Yeah,
so not quite the same.
Yeah, it's an interesting one from that perspective because I see. Look, when it comes down to it, their legacies were improved by them winning that World Cup, all 4 of those players. And It came at the end of their careers when they should have won beforehand. But it's very different in India's because, as I said, it's a much longer arc in that sort of situation. And also, the Sri Lanka one was kind of not bad luck, as I said before. So, yeah, look, there's comparisons there. It's different, but the same.
Yeah, and Mahela and Sangha were up against Australia, that Australian team, for quite a lot of their careers as well. At least the 2000 semi ODI World Cup. Rudra Patel asks, in the finals, I didn't blame Kohli for how he played. I still think it was a plus, but overall in current T20 cricket, is there a place for players who are only really capable to playing anchor innings? I think Virat evolved as well, and he was having a poor tournament because he was playing high-risk cricket. He just reverted back to his old self because wickets fell from the other end, and he felt that it was best to anchor thereon. Now, again, we've both talked about how it could have been, one of those knocks that could have been heavily criticized had India lost. But then again, that's the beauty of the format. It's a double-edged sword.
So, what I would say here is that I think the way he played early in the tournament allowed India to attack more and allowed them to play with a sense of freedom. So I would compare the way that Rohit played to the way that Stokes played in baseball. And I would compare the way that Kohli played to the way that Root played in baseball.
I like that.
You remember we had this big conversation once about, who was better and all these sorts of things in our chat. And one thing I said about Root was Root is the ultimate sort of team batter, right? And that's not a normal thing from England. England have quite often had batters who bat for themselves, but Root has always been a team batter. And him buying into baseball was why England could play baseball.
Yep.
Right? And, if you want an NBA one, it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar playing with Magic Johnson and still trying to just walk up the court and then being like, no, we're Showtime now. We're going to run teams out of the gym. You need that star player that's already there to buy in. Virat kept failing, but if you go back to the shows, I kept saying, he's trying to smack the ball everywhere and he's trying to put pressure back on teams at the moment. And because of that, Sky is going all in and Rishabh is going all in. And the rest of the guys after him are still going, even when they got themselves in trouble in some of those games. They still kept going with intent. And I would include it all the way through the final. You're right that Kohli didn't, but Akshar did.
Yes.
Right? So
and when your captain is playing a certain brand of cricket, it empowers the entire team to play that.
You needed Rohit and Virat to buy in, right?
Yes.
The unfortunate thing about this is that Virat didn't make any runs until the final, right? And so he is seen differently than Rohit. But for me, it needed both of those guys. And if I had known they were both going to bat like this, even with Virat's lack of form, I would have been like, I have no problem with them as openers, if that's the way that they are going to go about it. If they were going to regress to some of the stuff that we've seen before, then they shouldn't be in the same side together, right? And that's a completely different thing. So I actually think that Virat played it well. He didn't make any runs. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Agreed.
Sometimes you just don't make any runs.
Mm-hmm. Indie Guy asks, what can Dubey do to stay competitive considering... Is it Dubey or is it Dubs? Oh, is this a Golden State question? Yes, it is.
It is the Golden State Warriors.
What can the Dub City team do to stay competitive considering they can't get a point guard anymore and Clay is leaving? Curry is still
Let me just read that for you. So
is that Paul George and not point guard?
Yeah. It's fine. To be honest, I've been so out of it. I had a look at who Denver got in the draft, and other than that, I really haven't followed it because there was like 83 World Cup finals being played. Yeah. But then today I opened up my NBA apps and went all the way through. So I'm all on top of this. I think the Warriors are in all sorts of problems just because I think the West is so stacked. And I think they played the big card with Paul George and not being able to get that. I don't think Clay leaving is a big issue for them. I don't think anyone other than me and Indie Guy care about this question though.
Jonathan Braun from New Zealand asks, if Akshar Patel plays for New Zealand, is he their best player? I mean, I don't know why you guys underrate Glenn Phillips so much.
I'm a huge Devon Conway fan as well, although I know he's just had the worst World Cup of all time. But
Darren Mitchell is someone who is peaking-ish.
Oh, I'd pick Akshar Patel over Daryl Mitchell, I think. Look, he's just a really important player. And, because I once called him the Walmart Jadeja. And it's not because he's not an incredible player. It's just that Jadeja is already the 5-star person. And being 5% worse than him in all three skills makes you... sometimes you just don't want to be next to the other guy in that situation. Yeah. I think Akshar Patel's great. I'm a huge fan of him and have been since he was young, really.
Yeah. Glenn Phillips over Akshar Patel, though, Jonathan. IHTY asks, why did Rohit bowl Akshar in the 50th over of the final? We don't know. I think it was Pandya's over or a seamer's over because Heinrich Klaasen is the best spin basher in contemporary cricket.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised. I think when he went in with spin a lot between overs 5 was it and 10 or 11. I can't remember. There was a long period where it seemed to have a lot of spin in there. I think he needed to bowl Hardik a little bit more in there. And then I just don't think he was rating Hardik as high as perhaps I just thought Hardik would bowl well on this wicket because of the length that he bowls. And Rohit didn't go to that. But to be fair to Rohit, he went with his strengths. Now, in that particular case, what you're talking about is his strengths didn't come off. And, these things happen. But they won the World Cup. And if Markram had won the World Cup, he made mistakes with his bowling selections as well, right? Both of the guys made mistakes. And that's cricket.
Yeah. Sandeep Borse, or Borse, apologies if I've mispronounced that, says, lovely show, guys. Cheers. Thank you, Sandeep. Cheers to you as well. One comment. I think day matches are boring in T20s apart from the aesthetics point of view, but it makes the toss less relevant, which I like. I feel like it makes the toss more relevant in some ways because if there are dry conditions, then the surface gets harder to bat on.
Well, it sort of flips it around, doesn't it? And also we saw like in Dallas, and there was somewhere else, one of the other guys, St. Lucia, it actually did a little bit more in the morning because you were playing in the morning.
True.
So I thought it was quite interesting. It was funny. I was actually thinking to myself, this is cool because if we could, and look, eventually the IPL is the perfect example of this. The IPL is going to end up with 15, 16 teams, right? And they're going to play 2 or 3 games a day. I think it'll be a fascinating new addition because I was really enjoying. I hated the fact that the 2 games were split up for 2 different time zones. I hated that. But the bit I liked was that you had day-night games that were doing one thing and day games that were doing something, and you could get to the same ground and it was completely different. So I was fascinated at it from that point of view. But yeah, no, I like day games. There are certain players that don't play particularly well under lights who probably have had worse T20 careers because of that. Ross Taylor is a perfect example of this. Ross Taylor had a problem with his eyesight and he didn't see as well at night. And I know that's a really small thing, but it is a thing that probably affects a few batters.
Interesting. Abhishek K. Das, generous contribution from him as well, asks, past few years, India had been absolutely knocking everyone in the group matches, only lost in the semifinals or finals. How do teams build and maintain mental toughness for high-stakes knockout matches? I feel like you need to have a defined playing style. And then, of course, India and any other subcontinent team, particularly India and Pakistan, have a lot of pressure on them because people literally expect the world of them. And India is such a good team, and at times they go into their shell in finals when things start to go awry. But I feel like they've evolved, and that's why they're deserved winners as well. Like, look at them in the crunch situations in this final. They came up trumps. They literally snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. South Africa had gobbled that defeat or victory, and they went down their esophagus and pulled it back. That's what happened.
I don't think India was any more mentally tough in this tournament than they have been in others. I think that they had a game plan that made more sense. I think that they put pressure back on the opposition with bat and ball in a way that they hadn't beforehand. When it comes down to it, this is the South African argument, right? Choke, 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 choke is all we ever hear. I've done so much analysis on the South African team. They play differently in World Cups than they play in regular bilateral cricket. And the reason is they play a style of game that in bilateral cricket, there's no extra pressure on you. And so your house doesn't crumble. But in these sorts of games, and if you look at their whole history, they haven't always bowled for wickets in World Cup games. Quite often their top order would bat way too slow. And quite often their 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, however you want to put it, has a big glaring weakness in it, right? And so people go, they're not mentally tough. Well, actually, what is happening is they are playing one style of bilateral cricket and then a different style of tournament cricket. I think that's what India was doing. If you want to know about mental toughness, the one thing that they did this time is they fully committed to this style, as Bayram said before. And they were bound to win a tournament eventually anyway because they were so talented, right? I think I said this when they lost in 2022 or 2023, whichever one it was. I said, the weird thing about this is, by now they should have won a World Cup by dumb luck, right? Because they're so much more talented. Australia won a World Cup. You can almost argue Australia have won their last 2 World Cups with a stroke of luck, right? I would almost say that of the last 3 World Cups that Australia has played in, the one that I thought they were the most prepared for and the most in the groove for was this one, and they won the other ones. So sometimes that's how it happens. These tournaments are tough.
Very true. ABCDF asks, will Bumrah's action be replicated in the future like Malinga's has been, and how much does Bumrah having longer arms than usual help him? Of course, we'll see that action. Or renditions of it.
Naveen kind of has a version, doesn't he? So I think Naveen's the first sort of major guy we've seen at the next level with that kind of action. But people will copy Bumrah anyway.
When it comes to the release point, Naveen is also, he shortens the wicket, as does Bumrah. And
I
feel like I've already seen so many kids in the nets try it out.
Yeah, and he also bowls over his head. Slightly different kind of bowler, all things considered. But yeah, no, we will see those sorts of things. Look, when you look at Bumrah, I think Glenn McGrath's another perfect example of this. We don't think of Glenn McGrath as a physical freak in the way that we do maybe with Malinga or Warne or Murali or Bumrah. But most tall bowlers can't pitch the ball up the way that Glenn McGrath does, right? And so he could keep the stumps in play and he could keep the caught behinds in play as a tall bowler. And most tall bowlers, when they pitch the ball up, it's quite floaty. So there's something about Glenn McGrath that allowed him to be tall and bowl full when he needed to without just floating the ball up the way that Steve Harmison or even Curtly Ambrose could do sometimes.
Fair.
Most of these great bowlers are a freak in one way or another. Whether it's someone like Waqar Younis or Rangana Harath, that there's something about them that is a little bit different that comes out. And Bumrah's could be his arms. He's got so many physical advantages though. I'd be here all day trying to name them all. Yeah. Not to mention all the mental advantages. Yeah.
Go watch our Footmarks podcast. Seriously, if you like or you want to know more about Bumrah, that's the place for you. Path right winger again with a question says Michael Vaughan said on Crick Buzz, Morg's team wouldn't do much better on these surfaces. So is the Baz ball evolution of cricket just an illusion that they've created by making the surfaces? Nah, of course not.
I don't. I don't
even fully understand the question actually.
I don't really know why Michael Vaughan keeps coming up in this show. All I would say is this. They played spin really, really well under Owen Morgan, partly because Owen Morgan was in the side.
True.
Right? Also, Joe Root was in the side.
Mm-hmm.
Two of their best players of spin. They don't have as many good players of spin at the moment, and they're not playing spin as well. So I thought they played pretty well in India in 2016 in that World Cup. Even 2021, was it, in the UAE? I know injuries ended up curtailing them, but I didn't think they were as bad. They've not been playing spin very well. This was, as I said before, once we got to the West Indies, spin was going to play a bigger part. It played an even bigger part than I thought it was going to play at times in this tournament.
Absolutely.
And they didn't play it very well. So, but I don't know what Michael Vaughan is talking about here. And I don't watch his show, sorry. I'm not really apologizing, but I'm just saying I don't watch his show. I don't think he watches us either, if we're being honest. Especially not at the 1 hour, 56 minute mark.
Will Cooling with the final super chat of this Overthrows podcast says, who would win the World T20 if it ends with a 4-team finals day?
Oh, that's a great question. So you know what finals day is?
No.
So in the Blast, the two semi-finalists turn up in the morning.
They all play the same day?
They all play game. So it's 3 games in a row. It's the worst day to be a cricket journalist because it is the longest day of your life. And you're in Birmingham. No, I like Birmingham. And the food there is great at Edgebuster. But that's a really, really fascinating way of looking at it. Again, though, you still think that India is the most rounded team. So I thought South Africa were really, really good. But I just thought they had so many narrow paths of victory against India, whereas I thought India just had so many different ways they could have won that game. And so I find it hard. I don't know on what surfaces, in what sort of situation India wouldn't have won the World Cup. There are probably a couple of wickets that would have maybe the New York wicket, because that suited the South African bowlers so much more. But I don't think there were that many places that India wouldn't have won the World Cup, all things considered, just because they were quite rounded and everything else. So I'll go with India, which is not a particularly exciting answer to that very good question.
Yeah. And I mean, out of those 4 semi-finalists, you'd have to pick the best team, right? Even if they're playing more cricket in the same day. Anyway, that wraps up this episode of Overthrows. Thank you so much to all the people in the comments and everyone who sent a super chat. Just a quick reminder, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. That can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of this team, whether it be written content, videos, or podcasts. Thank you so much for your interactions, and we'll be back with another episode of Overthrows next week. That's all for now. Goodbye. And those of you who are with us on YouTube live, Stay with us because we'll be back with episode 91 of the Uncovered podcast after this short ad.
I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 91 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at Def Mango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find absolutely everywhere. There are a few talking points off the field that we have for this particular, episode. And what better place to start than talking about the retirements of Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, and now Ravi Jadeja as well. Virat Kohli had scored 75 runs in this entire World Cup campaign leading up to the final, and in the final he scored 76. Rohit Sharma had a splendid tournament and won the T20 World Cup as captain. Both of those guys said goodbye at the perfect time, signed off in style, aced their retirements to perfection, as did Ravi Jadeja, who in a weird way was the weakest link in this Indian team, if you really look at it from that angle. But no better way to go, Jared.
He had one of the gentlest rides of any player, didn't he? Just because Akshar was the bowler that they usually use before him, and Akshar quite often batted before him as well. So look, but Jadeja, when it comes down to it, was really important because of the whole number 8 thing, which we just covered in 17 hours on the last podcast. Look, we've seen lots of retirements, haven't we? And lots of players playing the last series. I think we thought that was going to be the case. The 50 over World Cup, because this T20 World Cup was so close afterwards, we thought a few players would hold on a little bit longer. Now we're starting to see those sorts of players, the Williamsons and obviously Warner and all those sorts of guys put their hands up. And India winning makes it even easier, And there's a whole generation of players that are moving on. I think sometimes you see that a lot at World Cups anyway. It might feel like this is a bigger generation than we've seen in previous times, but they've all done their job. The Indian guys and even the guys who didn't win the titles, they've done their jobs, and the next generation, that's what happens. And you can't play forever, and it'd be really interesting to see what Virat Kohli does. I kind of hope he just plays Test cricket and IPL from here on in. If he's going to keep playing IPL, I don't really want him. I mean, not that he's not a sensational one-day player, but I kind of don't think he needs to go on and continue to play one-day cricket either, unless he thinks the Champions Trophy is great. It'd be great if he just gave himself a break, gave himself some time, which I don't think there's any cricketer I've ever covered that needs more time than Virat Kohli, and just takes a break, goes, what do I like to do? Do you know what? I do want to try and win a title with RCB. I'm going to give myself 2 or 3 more years at that. I'm going to really commit to that. And I'm a bit annoyed I didn't make as many runs over the last couple of years in Test match cricket. I'm going to go and be the beast that I used to be before again. And also, I love watching him bat. He's, from the minute the Fab Four started, he was my pick, and I haven't really changed. Certainly my favorite of them all to watch by a long distance. And so I just want to see him making runs in Test cricket into the future, and the RCB thing, well, he's got India over the line here. Let's see what he can do for RCB. There's no RCB fans who've listened to that who actually really believe that is possible.
Yeah, I mean, they've had illustrious careers, both Rohit and Virat and Jadeja. I mean, sure, he was a bit of a passenger at times in this T20 World Cup, but he's had a phenomenal career. And both of those guys, Rohit and Virat, are batting behemoths, and they've
scored
over 4,000 runs each in the format for India, and they've struck at. One is, I think Rohit is at 140, Kohli is at 137. So they've both done a very, very good job. The averages are up too, and they are legends. They've had an Imran Khan-esque farewell in this particular format, I feel. Yeah, and I mean, that is literally the best way to sign off, because let's be real, they might not have gotten picked for the next T20 World Cup. All three of these guys. I don't, even if that was the case, and I suppose it's possible,
I just don't see why they would want to hang around waiting for it now. Like, unless they were like, I'm going to play this. I just personally, and I don't know any of the three of these guys. So I'm talking about this from like a relationship I have with them. I just can't see why they would have any of them would have sat there and go, do you know what? I'll come back in 2 years' time. It just seems too far away and too pointless. So I'm happy that they're moving on at a good time for them.
Yes, yes. And I mean, we've definitely enjoyed them over the years. So thank you for all the entertainment, Rohit, Virat, and Ravi Jadeja. And we hope to see you in Test cricket at the very least for a long, long time, because all three of those guys are actually quite critical to India's Test team if you really look at it. Another guy who did bow out in style is someone who's never won a World Cup with India. And Rahul Dravid now finally has one as coach in his final assignment as India's head coach. What a way to go out for him as well. And I feel like he also... Did you see the video where he kind of lifted the trophy and kind of let that dog out, which we've never seen in his entire playing career? He clearly has that passion as well. And what I loved about him, Jared, was he's a calm and collected guy generally and someone who's very technical. But also prior to this final, he said that I don't like the narrative where you need to win this cup for somebody. It's out there to win. There's a cup. Someone needs to win it. And we should be the team that goes on and takes it for us. Win it for yourself. And if there's something out there, it's there for the taking. So I like that mindset. And I am personally a big Rahul Dravid fan. Love the way he played his cricket. And he is one of the best test batters of all time. Wonder where he makes the list in your book. But yeah.
He made it. I tell you what, just for those who don't know, I asked him to chat to me for the book, and obviously we used to work together. We've been friends for quite a long time, and I sent it out there thinking, well, Rahul's not going to be able to do this. The World Cup's coming up, and he did, and he took it as seriously as anyone else I've interviewed. Probably more. Him and Jimmy Adams just got so into it, right? Like just the absolutely brilliant talking to both of them, and he did get into it, but he sent me, when he sent the email back, he goes, I probably won't make it in the top 50. He's kind of that guy, right? Like, and yeah. I'm just happy. I think he's the only. I might know a couple of other people around the periphery, I suppose, but I don't have a huge friendship group within that Indian squad, like I do from some of the other teams, obviously. But I was really happy. I think they showed him after the second last ball. So with one ball to go when India couldn't lose, and you just saw how, and I was just like, that made me feel happy to see someone. And, when you work in cricket this long, it's great that Australia win, but I don't really care if Australia lose, if that makes sense. I kind of really enjoy it when they win. But when they lose, I don't feel as much now because I'm a professional. But when I have a friend playing, or someone I know, or someone whose journey I know really well, or whatever, I really get invested. And I think, for me, Rahul Dravid was one of the reasons I wanted India. I wanted them to win because of that generation thing, and because of how good they've been, and to shut people up talking about them as being chokers. But I also wanted them to win from a Rahul Dravid perspective, and I think it cements him as an Indian legend, right? He took the team that couldn't quite get over the line. He got them there. For most of us who watched him bat, we already knew he was a legend. But for that next generation who didn't get to see him bat and didn't understand what it was like to watch a man who literally put the highest price on his wicket of pretty much almost anyone in the game.
The one.
If you didn't see it, you don't get it, right? And I understand that sort of stuff. Now he's got two generations working for him, and well done to him.
Yeah, go well, in the remainder of your life, Jamie. I'm not sure if you want to stay involved working in cricket or not. Maybe you want a break.
Is this the perfect time to invite him on if he wants the third chair on our show?
Yeah, that would be fucking amazing,
Because we know that at the 2 hour and 8 minute mark of our recording, Rahul Dravid is sitting there going, finally they asked.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a classy guy. I don't think anyone can hate on him, man. He's just too lovable a character, and I'm really happy that he, led India to a T20 World Cup title as coach, because he's a damn good coach as well. It seems like it, because that dressing room, to manage all of those egos and all of those star players, that takes, a certain something as well. So credit to him. And moving forward, a bit of sad news, Jared. Frank Duckworth, co-inventor of the DLS method, has passed away at age 84. Of course, people were making the joke that South Africa made a final right after, but I don't think that's a correctly timed one. Someone who has given the sport a lot, I suppose. We're still using that method, and it was sad news, wasn't it?
Do you want the greatest Frank Duckworth story of all time?
Why else am I sitting here at the 2-hour 9-minute mark? That's
Duckworth and Lewis wrote a book about their lives. I think that both of them are covered in this book, if I remember correctly. And Frank Duckworth was doing his PhD in like metallurgy or something. I could have made that bit up, but it was something random he was doing his PhD in. And he was doing his PhD in Liverpool. And so he's in Liverpool doing his PhD, and he was staying with a woman who took lodgers. And if I think I'm getting all the facts of this right, but the woman who he was lodging with was John Lennon's auntie.
Okay.
And so for 6 months, I think John Lennon and Frank Duckworth lived in the same house.
Wow.
Right?
That is crazy.
And you Google this to make sure I haven't got any of these details wrong, but it's roughly correct anyway. And so for 6 months, he lived in a house with one of the most famous people in the world. And this is their biography. It's a proper book. It's not like it's like a pamphlet or anything. It's a proper book. And I remember reading it. And there's almost nothing on John Lennon, other than the fact he says something along the lines of, he was a bit moody in the morning. And, you know, I didn't really spend much time with him. And you're just like, Frank, if nothing else.
He was him? Of John Lennon's aunt. Yes.
There we go. I can't believe I got all those details right. But I just remember thinking, Frank, you've got to sell this book, son. You are famous for an algorithm. And you lived with John Lennon. Duckworth Lewis, great. There's a band named after your algorithm. It's really cool. We all talk about it. That's great. But just give me a chapter on John Lennon. Just give me a chapter. What sort of cricketer was John Lennon? What did John Lennon think of Richie Benaud's rain rule? Whatever you've got, right, that you can give us there. Anyway, look, those guys, it's not a perfect system. But they gave, if you go back and have a look at the systems beforehand, they're absolutely terrible. It was mathematically based. It's got some issues. I think T20 cricket has moved beyond it. But they really gave us the opportunity to finish games on TV and build audiences that we would not have been able to do beforehand. So, you know, he, as far as I'm concerned, absolute legend of cricket for what he managed to do. And, you know, what a random life he lived, and you know, thoughts go out to his family.
Absolutely. Whoever was associated to Duckworth, Frank Duckworth, whether you be a part of his family or his friend, deepest condolences. Someone who cricket will remember for a long, long time and will continue to remember. His legacy is etched in the DLS method, of course, which we continue to use. So our deepest condolences. Another bit of sad news, I suppose. Well, I'm not sure how you would feel about this if you're a Sri Lankan fan. Maybe we need to ask Estelle. Chris Silverwood has stepped down as Sri Lankan head coach. And what I am wondering is whether this is, you know, as a direct result of Sri Lanka's, you know, poor T20 World Cup campaign, then getting, you know, knocked out in the group stages, or, you know, was he just done with that particular job? He gave Sri Lankan cricket a lot, you know, that team developed well under him. Mickey gave him a developing team. He helped develop it further. The fast bowling stocks improved under Chris Silverwood, who himself was a fast bowler. I feel like that's the legacy that he leaves.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame, isn't it? All things considered. Obviously, we don't really know anything at the moment about the situation. I would hope that they didn't just lose badly and that he's been given the arse, because I don't think he's that kind of coach anyway. I think he's a development coach, and this is a team that is young and incredible. And again, it feels like they got a good person in charge, put themselves in a good position, and they've stuffed it up. And I hope that's not the case. Maybe Chris just wanted to move back to the UK, or I don't know Chris particularly well. Although I think I faced his son, who was about 9 or 10, in a charity game once. And I know he was there at the time. And I remember meeting him. He always seemed like a good guy when I talked to him as a journalist, or, you know, just occasionally when I saw him around hotels and things. I just hope that it's just a lifestyle choice, and it's not a politics choice because of what's going on with Sri Lankan cricket, or it's not a, well, you guys were terrible in this World Cup, because they were terrible in this World Cup, and we all understand that. I think he was doing some really interesting things with Sri Lankan cricket, and I would have liked to have seen him do that more.
Post Vas, Kulasekara, Malinga, Kulasekara, Malinga, because Vas had retired at that point, I feel. Sri Lankan cricket did not see that boom in, the fast bowling department. And right now they've got so many. They're young, they're raw, they have to be, nurtured and groomed. But I feel like Chris Silverwood has a lot to do with that, and I hope that is it a scapegoat situation, because there ain't no goat like a scapegoat, right? And Sri Lankan cricket is a mess, as is Pakistan cricket and so many other boards. The Bangladesh cricket board.
Coming off this World Cup, there's, like England's not quite sure now where to go. I know that's less of the board, but again, New Zealand in a complete mess. There's a few teams coming out of this World Cup where you're just like, oh, shit. Like, what is the next step here? It's this next year and a half, if you're not basically Australia, India, South Africa, and South Africa have their own issues, but, there's a few teams you're just like, what direction is this about to go in? And what direction is the board about to go in some cases?
Absolutely. And on that grim note, let's take a short ad break. You're watching Uncovered with Jared and Behram, and we'll be back on your screen after
NordVPN
this
know
ad.
nothing about knuckleballs, but they can help you with online safety. If you need a VPN, use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount and 4 months for free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is risk-free. The link is in the show notes. So stop thinking about knuckleballs for 2 minutes and go to nordvpn.com/Kimber and get your deal. A few years ago, I tried to work out what...
Hello and welcome back to Uncovered. You guys are with Jared and Behram. And Jared, England have announced their test squad for the first and second test matches versus the West Indies, the first of which at Lord's I will be covering. And I'll be there in England with Jared when we're doing when we're recording next week's Overthrows and Uncovered. So watch out for that, guys. Lots of omissions. Johnny Bairstow has been axed. Ben Foakes has been axed.
All the wicket keepers.
Yeah. Jamie Smith has been brought in, a 23-year-old Surrey player. So Foakes will go back to playing for Surrey and Jamie Smith will be playing for England. Shoaib Bashir has been preferred as England's lone spinner ahead of Jack Leach and Tom Hartley. And in the pace bowling department, you've got Matthew Potts, who's played Test cricket before, Jimmy Anderson, who's only available for the first Test match, and then you've got Gus Atkinson and Dylan Pennington, who actually bowls quite a fast bowl, as the uncapped seamers for this series. Very, very interesting selection calls over there by England.
Yeah, they're certainly trying to rebuild on the fly now, aren't they? And this is probably a good summer for them to be able to do that. The Bairstow one was obvious. The Jamie Smith one was pretty clear. They just love him so much. And I'd heard so many things. Really happy that Matthew Potts is back, because I think he was fantastic.
Matthew Potts was also so good in India for the England Lions side, remember? He was taking wickets on wickets.
Atkinson, they kind of have to work out how good Atkinson is, and this is a good time to do that. And as you said, Shoaib Bashir. Did he not get whacked everywhere in...
Yes.
Was it Dan Lawrence who did it?
Was Dan Lawrence, 38 runs. And after that, Lewis Kimber smashed Ollie Robinson for 43 runs. So Ollie can go back to his
That's how we do, buddy.
Job. Yeah.
That's how we do.
Ollie did not get selected for the squad either. And I'm sure that the Wisden guys will take care of him.
It'd be really interesting, because I thought that they would probably go Robinson at one end, Potts at the other end, and then Atkinson at first change. I mean, I know Jimmy's going to play, but I mean, going forward. And they just seem to have just gone, Robertson's gone. And he's still one of the best new ball bowlers in the world, but we know about all of his many issues as well, which are there. And, my brother Louis might have been, a part of that as well.
Is it Louis Kimber? I thought it was Lewis.
Is it Lewis? I thought it was Louis.
I have no idea.
That's actually quite funny. Someone told me that on Classic FM, a newsreader actually read it out saying that Jared Kimber had done it rather than...
I sent you a tweet in which they said that after Rocky Flintoff, now we have Jared Kimber's son smashing sixes.
So, yeah, I thought it was Louis, but maybe it is Lewis. I'm not sure. I've only ever seen his name written down until recently, because people would always say, are you related? And I was like, look, all Kimbers are related, but he might be my 19th cousin. But yeah, so I think it's really interesting that England is going to do this. It's probably for the best, but they also might struggle at times in this series, right? It's not particularly a strong team, especially from a wicket-taking perspective. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered in that particular lineup at the moment. So fascinated to see how it goes. And, maybe one of the more interesting things is they still have Chris Wokes. So instead of
Yes.
Ollie Robertson, they've gone Chris Wokes, which I do, again, find fascinating.
They would want the batting depth over there with Chris Wokes, I feel. But what I find surprising is no Mark Wood. Because surely you keep him in the squad, right? Maybe they want to give him a break for the first and second test, and then he can come in after they've tried a few of the new guys. Because Dylan Pennington, I saw some clips. He bowls rockets. Some of those deliveries are flying off the surface.
Yeah. It's weird because there's experience and there's not experience. And do you know what? From a fan's perspective and from a media perspective, this is the perfect squad. Because you just get bored of the same teams coming out over and over again, right? And you're seeing a team just go, we're going to rebuild, but we're going to rebuild like shit. Wait for this.
Yes.
This is going to whack you in the face, this rebuild. And I like that.
But Jared, look at their top five. Duckett, Crawley, Ollie Pope, Joe Root, Ben Stokes, and then you've got...
Harry Brook?
Am I missing over here? Harry Brook. The top six is basically unchanged. And then you have Jamie Smith and then Chris Wokes and then some of the new pacers after Jimmy is gone. So even though that squad looks very radical, in the playing 11, maybe Shoaib Bashir gets a go for the entire series and there are a few other guys who will come in the bowling department. Otherwise, it's more or less quite safe.
Yes and no. I think the fact Dan Lawrence is in it is interesting.
Well, Darren Lawrence has been in terrific form.
Yeah, and also, does that put pressure on Ollie Pope again? And they still don't have a number 3 in this team, right?
Yeah.
The Bashir thing is really interesting. So you're right. There's a few, but you are talking about in this, and I don't know how many players are in the squad. Is it 13 or 14?
I didn't count them.
If you look at the squad, there's 7 or 8 really interesting decisions.
Yeah.
You don't see that very often, right? That is a team going, okay, reset. Let's see how we go from here.
Bazball 2.0, let's try some new things and let's not include Sam Cook for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sam Cook and Ollie Robertson not being there seems to think that you look at this bowling attack, and this is a bowling attack that is preparing for Australia.
That's basically it. That's what they do. It's ashes to ashes, their preparation. And that's why they've gone for guys like Pennington and Gus Atkinson, because they want that pace, right? And
Even
they don't want to
potentially
rely on
Bashir.
Mark Wood. True.
Tall spinner to go up against the left-handers. So it'd be interesting anyway. But I like it because there's plenty to talk about. And this will make this series a lot more interesting, especially now that Kemar Roach is not, playing. And so...
Yeah, and Varun told us to mention that especially. But even though the West Indies are losing out on some accuracy, I feel like they've got both the Josephs, Shamar and Alzari. Jaden Seals is promising. And then who else am I missing in that bowling attack? I'm definitely missing someone.
Yeah, no. Moti might play as well, mightn't he? But you look at Kemar Roach, and he's just, he's such a good bowler, and he's such a fantastic player all the way through. And England is where he should be, very close to his best. And I know he hasn't always dominated in England. But when he's bowled brilliant balls in England, it's almost been unplayable. And he's quite often done it in weaker bowling attacks. This, as you said, feels like a slightly stronger bowling attack. I would have been really interested to see how he would go. I just love Kemar Roach. He's been one of my favorites since the first day he bowled. So for me, it's always disappointing when he's not playing.
Yeah, he's experienced as well and has played a lot of county cricket, so that is really disappointing for the West Indies. But it's going to be a cracker of a series. I'll be there at Lord's, guys, so I'll be bringing you some live action and some pieces. And Jared and I have some fun content planned for you as well, whilst I'll be in the UK. Let's take that super chat and call it a day. Path right winger, never misses, always hits. Mitchell Johnson, he said in a podcast, as a young man, I didn't have the strength to hold my body up, but by the end of his career, he was visibly more muscular. Is that why modern bowlers aren't as deadly?
So Dirk Nannis once said that, so he didn't play cricket when he was young professionally, and he starts playing when he's about 27, 28, and really doesn't become a professional till he's 29. And he has this theory that it's very hard to bowl fast consistently without an adult man's body. So we know that Pat Cummins and Nazim Shah and Waqar Younis and all these different guys. Although Waqar Younis is probably not a good example because he had whatever age he was when he made his debut, he was one of the most ridiculous physical specimens we've ever had in cricket. But there is an argument that you can bowl fast when you're young, as in mechanically, right? But that the strain that it puts on your body makes it very hard to do it repeatedly and to do it without injury. So you can kind of, it takes a freak to be able to do it consistently without your body falling apart or without your action falling apart.
True.
And what Mitch Johnson here is kind of following on what Dirk Nannes says. And so we in cricket try and pick bowlers when they're young and fast because that's when we want them, right? We want them in the side when they're young and fast because that's when they're going to have the biggest impact. Whereas actually what we are probably seeing now is that sort of, Mitchell Johnson is a good example of this. Mark Wood is another very good example of this, is you put these players in a really good dietary professional structure. And actually their best and fast years might be between the age of 28 and 32, right? If you can get them there. The issue is, if you think about Mitchell Johnson, he quit cricket when he was young. And Mark Wood was always injured, so he didn't bowl a lot. Most bowlers aren't like that. And so there is an issue there. And it's why Pakistan's a perfect example of this. Pakistan get these young bowlers in. They're not always biomechanically perfect. They're not looked after physically as much as they should be. And then they lose their pace and they get injured. And then they either come back as a completely different bowler. And the same thing happened to Dennis Lillee. This used to happen right across all cricket. But you see it in Pakistan again and again and again. And what Mitch Johnson is saying, and it's more of, you talk about him being visibly more muscular. If you listen, I'm pretty sure I'm right with this. No, I am, because I've talked to Mitch Johnson about this before when Mitch had his own podcast. And I was talking to him about this. He had a very different kind of body from the beginning of his career to the end of his career. And a lot of it was about core strength and building up his core strength. And that took him a long time. And he actually got much more buff towards the end of his career when he knew he was going to retire and he wanted a beach body. It's a very different kind of physicality. And I remember seeing Srisanth, right? When Srisanth went off to be a Bollywood actor and act in the Kerala industry and all those sorts of things, he got really, really buff. And he was saying to me, I'm getting buff for bowling. And I was like, mate, you cannot bowl with that body. So it's not just about that. It's about the core strength that you build up and the way that your muscles develop as you get older. And it's, the strength that you need to be able to bowl very, very fast. I think we probably have got it wrong in cricket throughout the first 150 years of picking young guys when they're young and fast. And actually now we might be getting to a period where we're starting to work it out a little bit more and bowlers can bowl further into their career. Someone like Liam Plunkett was probably a much better bowler when he was old and strong than he was when he was just young and fast, right? And I think it's the combination of all those different things I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of wraps up this episode of Uncovered. Thank you to everyone who was in the comment section and to those who sent us super chats. And just a quick reminder to everybody, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. That can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of our team, whether it be written content, podcasts, or videos. We'll be back with another episode of Uncovered next week. That is all for now. Goodbye.
Occasionally, I also talk about behind-the-scenes stuff. A huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon and helped us build this channel. Join our Patreon community and unlock exclusive benefits. Enjoy AMAs, live calls with me, and connect with fellow cricket enthusiasts on Discord. Express your cricket fandom with Bodyline t-shirts. Discover their extensive range of player-inspired tees, featuring cricket legends such as Murali, Warne, and Wasim. With team-themed designs and options for hard